I lived in a farm around 4 years ago. From the moment we moved there, I could tell something was wrong. I felt uneasy in there, as if there was something constantly spying on me. A little detail about the place and situation. We didn't technically own the place. It was borrowed from a woman that was trying to sell it. Call it a demo. So we didn't have access to the house and slept on the wooden storage house. The farm itself was like this. There was a barbed wire gate that you manually had to move in the entrance, and in front of it was an open empty field with one of those outside washrooms to the right. Passing by it, there was a small group of trees, and then the place where we slept. Passing that was the actual house to the left, and then the forest. In the forest entrance there was a tree with a ripped plastic bag tied to its branches, meaning the bag had been tied there for a while. It was still small, and people used to do that here to make marks or something. And right in front of it, there was a mound. Someone buried something there. I moved there with 4 dogs, plus the dog that already lived there that we took care of. Our routine was to wake up at 5 a.m. to go to the city, so I could go to school and my parents could go to work. The first night we stayed there, I noticed my room was the only one in the entire house that didn't have a lock, and I couldn't sleep because of the weird feeling I had, and I stayed up all night and slept on my way to school. Then things got weirder. The door started opening at night. I dismissed it as the wind. Cliché, I know, but it became more frequent and violent. Then, still on the first week, I saw it. It was a black humanoid figure with a white face. It was like the white face had empty sockets, and instead of a mouth, just an empty cavity in its face. It stood on my door entrance staring at me. I decided I would not sleep while I lived there, and I would bring myself to move or do anything. So I just kept staring at it to convince myself my mind was playing tricks on me. Then, some nights later, it became impossible to pretend, because it started moving and doing things. It entered my room, tapped on the window. It was a metal window that was right beside my bed, and slightly moved things and kept being a general creep. Whenever I shone light on it, it disappeared, but the eerie feeling persisted. I started keeping a flashlight in my room and playing music to keep myself calm and awake. Eventually I started falling asleep in some days, and in those days I would wake up with headaches and the feeling my eyes had been pushed into my skull. Every time I awoke, it was in pain. My parents eventually got security cameras because while we were in the city, some people entered the place to go fishing, as there was a shortcut to the neighboring farm lake through our forest. This is an important detail. Then one day my aunt went to visit. She had some weird superstitions and said the place had gold buried in it for some reason. She went to the forest and saw the mound under the marked tree I spoke about earlier, and decided it was a good idea to dig it up. Bad idea. I was digging it, and I need to describe what happened now very well to pass the feeling, so bear with me. There is a certain feeling of digging dirt that differs from rocks or mud or clay. I learnt this that day as I dug the hole. Then after going through a small layer of fragmented rock, I hit something soft and resistant that felt like leather. I hit it harder and pushed through it. Immediately after it, there was something hard with a complex and detailed shape. I tried to break through it since my aunt insisted it was a protection for the gold, and my parents were just whipping me into helping her. But it was no use, and it occupied most of the area of the hole, so we couldn't dig around it. It was like the hole was made specifically to bury it. My aunt then said she would cover the hole. She didn't cover it, and we went home. That night was hell. There was no tapping on the window. There was a strong banging. The thing kept entering my room non-stop, and even the flashlight wasn't working. I had to stay awake, feeling everything pressuring me. My door wouldn't close, and the thing would make noises and would be there staring at me. Now this is the part that makes the security cameras so important. They stopped working the moment it all started. There were 4 cameras, one pointing towards the farmhouse, one of them pointing to the washroom, one of them that showed my window, and one that pointed towards the forest. That morning I went to check on the camera footage, and all the cameras had stopped working except the one pointing at the forest. There was only static for the other 3, but that one had a small blur. After that night, it never appeared again. I still couldn't sleep because of fear, but it never actually showed up and things got calmer. We moved out some time after that. I keep thinking about it every now and then. 4 years later, it was too real, and there were things that were noticed by other people too. I especially keep thinking about the thing we hit while digging, and how that night was the worst. I keep asking myself if we found a body, or some haunted object that was hidden. I'm 22, and as my mum was pregnant with me, my grandfather passed away from lung cancer. The only thing he ever got me was this little clown doll that was supposed to hang over my crib. When you pull the clown's leg down, it plays a little music box style song as it winds itself back up. Now I know this already sounds like a cheesy horror story, but let's stick with it. When I was a child, maybe 7 or 8, I used to have the clown hanging from the metal curtain tiebacks in my room, probably because I was too young to have read or watched it. But one night my mom walked up the stairs and in my room while I was asleep, because the clown was playing its song, but it had its legs pulled down. Apparently it played for about 5 minutes, and I do remember my mum recording it on her old flip phone and showed me that morning. We actually found out later in the day that on that night, my great-grandma had passed away, so my grandfather's mum. My mum is super adamant it was her dad, sending some sort of signal, but I'd be interested to know what you guys think. I should start this by saying I didn't used to believe in ghosts. I work in a building from the 1890s that I was told was once a brothel. Once I was working at night, when no one else was there, to get some extra work done. A lot of weird stuff happens on the 2nd floor, and a little after 3 a.m, I had to go up there and put some things away and lock up. The light switch is at the top of the stairs, so I had to walk up the stairs in the dark. There are no windows in the hallway, so the only light was coming up from the bottom of the stairs. As I reached the top, I thought I saw a human figure walk across the hall, from one room to another, through 2 closed and locked doors, and fast, like a video sped up 50%. I was pretty freaked out, but skeptical. Maybe I just imagined it. The 2nd floor of this building has always freaked me out at night. My co-worker too. So I turned on the light at the top of the stairs and walked down the hall to put some things away in the storeroom. While in the storeroom, a large machine part that had a flat bottom and was just sitting there on the table fell over while I had my back turned. It couldn't have just fallen over on its own or been knocked over by me. My heart started pounding and I said out loud, "I'm sorry, I'm leaving now." I locked the storeroom and started walking quickly back down the hall. As I walked, a little gust of wind blew through the hallway from behind me. There were no doors or windows open to the outside anywhere in the building, and no one else was there to have opened one, so it wasn't the result of a natural pressure differential. I started speed walking. As I passed between the two doors where I had seen the fast-moving apparition, I swear I heard a woman's voice whisper my name behind me. I turned off the light and stumbled quickly down the stairs. Halfway down, there's a small landing with a door. I fumbled with the latch that held the door open, terrified to look back up into the dark hallway above me. I got the door closed, and as I locked it, I felt sure that there was something on the other side. I was panicking. I clocked out of there as quickly as I could, and a few days later I went up there before dawn on an opening shift, and I was talking to the ghost, or whatever it was, the whole time, apologizing for my intrusion and asking to be left alone. I felt crazy, but it was better than being haunted again, and everything was normal except I felt someone lightly grasp the back of my shirt as I passed between the two doors. That was the last time I went up there alone in the dark. I am currently on vacation in Mexico. I have family here, my grandparents, 4 uncles and their family, and my family all live on the same street. We live on a ranch and the nearest airport is a 4-hour drive. When we arrive here, Uncle D picks us up, and on our way to our ranch, him and my dad were catching up. My uncle proceeds to tell him that currently they have been having some weird experiences with a doll, that the doll was haunting him and his family for a while. This included keeping them up all night by knocking on their windows and stuff. He also said that it was attacking people who were walking down the street late at night, and that a guy even tried to shoot it. Everyone was fed up about it and tried to set up a group to attack it. I was creeped out, but thought that maybe he was lying or joking around. We arrived, and for the first 2 days we slept at my aunt's house. This is because our house had recently been renovated. Those 2 nights, I wasn't able to sleep, and every time I closed my eyes I had a dream that I was being assaulted. I told my dad, and he decided that we should try and sleep in our own house. On our 3rd night there, we were walking down the street late at night to visit my grandparents, and my Uncle Jay was there. He was drinking and said that the doll was going to get us if we kept walking at night. He was drunk, so I dismissed the comment. Later that night, we came home and tried to sleep for the first time. I'm not gonna lie, the house feels really creepy at night. I can't walk down a long hallway that goes to an empty room because I feel some bad energy there. My room faces the big glass sliding door we have to the backyard. I always felt like someone was watching me there. We've been here for 3 weeks already, and yesterday my little cousin Jack was outside with us in the backyard. We were burning trash and he mentioned that the doll lived in the big tree in our backyard. He lives right next to us, and we don't have a gate separating our property from his. He says he can hear it cry at night, and one time he saw it when he was going to the restroom, as their restroom is located outside their house towards the backyard. I didn't believe him, but got spooked out, and that same night, Uncle D's son was playing Xbox with us. Cousin Jack was with us too, and my brother brought up that doll and said that Cousin Jack was lying to us. As soon as we mentioned it, Uncle D's son went pale and said he didn't want to talk about it. That spooked me out, because Uncle D said that the doll was haunting them. So, if it was true, his son had to know something about it. It scared him so much, and that's when I believed it. He got me thinking, and that's probably why at night I felt like something watches me. My room faces the glass door, and the tree is right in front of it. So, after a few days, we noticed our sink was smelling. Now, we were on vacation, so we weren't cooking, and everything in the sink was mainly cups or bowls of cereal. We went on a 3-day trip to Guatemala, as we were staying in Chiapas, so the dishes from that morning were left uncleaned for 3 days. When we came back, there was a rank smell coming from the sink. It smelled like rotten flesh, and we didn't know where it was coming from. I then cleaned the dishes, and hundreds of larvae started to crawl out the sink. Some people might think that it was us being dirty, but we never found what caused that reek. I didn't find any rotten meat or anything that the larvae were eating. Some people said it must have been the pipes or something in the walls, but the house is brand new, and the walls are made of brick and cement. As soon as the larvae came out, the smell went away. It was like a scene from a horror movie. We all left when we heard my cousin describing the muñeca differently. Someone said it was a mono or a monkey, so we concluded that it could have been a shapeshifter. I luckily never ran into it, but there have always been stories going around of unexplained things happening there. People say that they could have been made up stories because people are bored, whereas others say it's the truth. I've had my own experiences in there before. I've heard something with dark, heavy voice speaking to me in English when no one there speaks it. I've had dolls that I brought from the United States start moving when I leave them in that house. My brother claimed that he heard La Llorona before when he was coming home late. It could just be our imagination, but stuff does happen in Mexico. Due to my father's work, we were constantly chasing after his jobs, sometimes spending only a few months in a single location. After my father got a new job in this small town, we moved into a rather nice house on a dead-end road. It was a large house with wood floors and a generally exceptional feel about it. Glad to have found a nice house in our price range, we didn't really think too much on why it was empty and why the landlords were willing to rent it out for such a very low cost. It would only take a few months before we found out for ourselves what was going on. The haunting started as just a feeling that we kids would get from time to time. At first, it was just a general sense of unease, but this quickly escalated. As time went by, we slowly transformed from simply thinking we were being watched to seeing forms in the corner of our vision. The feeling of being watched had spread into the night at this point, and few of us were able to get a full night's rest. This continued on until we began to see things much closer to the forefront of our vision, and we had started seeing dark forms in the night, scaring us to the point that we'd all sleep on the same bed for a weak sense of security. Then we found the reason for the haunting. My brother and I were cleaning up an old closet that we had simply dumped a bunch of our toys into after we moved in. The bottom of it had a small wall marking into something of a built-in toy chest. We finally had some boxes to hold our things, and no longer needed to leave them in the closet. As we pulled out our things, we noticed that the carpet was loose. We were kids, and we were not very smart. Instead of telling our parents, we just pulled the carpet back, revealing something that none of us would ever forget. A tombstone. It was right there, with the name and dates already carved into it. Thinking there was someone buried in our closet, we quickly showed the tombstone to our parents. Thankfully, they decided to remove it from the house, and we thought that was it. But the haunting didn't stop. We started having nightmares and sick spells whenever we were alone in the house, and where it went from there was something a 7-year-old me couldn't understand. All I knew was fear, as I would awake at all hours of the night to see a dark figure standing over me, watching me sleep. I would cover my head in my sheets and pray to God to protect me. Usually it worked, but sometimes I would lower the sheet to see a dark, ghostly face now staring me in the eye, its face inches from my own. Soon, we were all seeing faces in the dark, and we stopped doing things on our own at night. We would share beds. We would never get up or do anything on our own. And often, waking up whoever we were sleeping with to go to the bathroom or to get a drink of water. The final straw was the night I was foolishly walking around the house at night during a lightning storm. And as I was walking into my room, lightning flashed at just the right moment, and I saw a figure under my bed, staring at me with a grin that literally ran from ear to ear. Its needle-like teeth bared for me to see. I screamed in absolute terror, and it would take days for me to be willing to even play in my room again. We removed the bed frames and started sleeping with our mattresses on the floor for protection from whatever it was that I saw. But the nightmares and sightings continued. Thankfully, my father's job moved to a new location, and we were able to leave that house. In just 6 months, we went from happy to having such a nice home to wanting nothing more than to leave it behind. I will never forget that horror, and it has left permanent scars on my soul. Even to this day, almost 25 years later, I still have nightmares about living in that house. God only knows what monsters were there with us. And just saying this out loud has left my heart pounding with the fear of that memory. A few years ago, I was reading a forum and a woman said she had a haunted photograph. She said that the picture was taken of her and there was a ghost girl beside her that wasn't there when the picture was taken. More importantly, she said that anyone that saw the photo had bad things happen to them. Naturally, I had to see it. She sent me a link. It was, as she described. It didn't look scary to me at all, and nothing happened to me. Eventually, I forgot about it. Not long ago, I was looking for something in my messages and came across the link to the photo. I looked at it again and spent probably 2 minutes staring and trying to look at the ghost girl in detail. Then I closed the tab and forgot about it. Not 2 hours later, my stepmom calls me to tell me my dad had a pulmonary embolism. He lived. On his way home, my husband hit a deer and totaled his car. And that night, my daughter got a horrible stomach bug that left us so dehydrated we had to go to the ER. I am never looking at that photo again. When my mum got remarried, we moved into a small one-story house. She married a man who my sister and I had only met twice before, and they had only been dating 6 months before getting married. Even at 10 years old, I felt that it was quite a short amount of time to be marrying someone you'd only just dated a little bit. It was a house located on Nevada Street. It seemed fine at first, but I soon came to realize how unsettling it became. When my sister and I debated over who got the top bunk of our new rooms, we played rock, paper, scissors. I was victorious and rubbed it in her face. I enjoyed my top bunk that day, at least until night came. I don't remember how soon after moving in that it happened, but it wasn't too long, maybe less than a month, maybe 2 weeks. But I woke up in the middle of the night to loud thumps on the ceiling, like heavy boots walking right over my head. I was petrified. My body couldn't move because I was scared stiff. I just shut my eyes closed. Some nights it didn't sound like heavy boots. It sounded like little feet running across the ceiling. Just small thuds and then a boom. The sound of a small boy crashing to the floor of the ceiling. I would still wake up and be petrified. I tried telling my mum, but she shrugged it off as a nightmare, and I slept with the lights on since. We had an old, fat computer in the basement, like the ones in the 1990s before flat Macs were a thing. The basement was nice. The ceiling was done and there was a carpet. It was inviting. But man, did I get real heebie-jeebies down there. Just the feeling of always being watched and stared at. I was always down there downloading my favorite music onto CDs or playing pinball. At the time, I had a pet named Snickers who would always growl or bark at the walls. At first I thought she was just being a dumb dog. Eventually she started growling at me as I was sitting at the computer desk, growling and backing away. A chill crawled down my spine when I realized that she was barking at the space under the desk, right where I was sitting. Needless to say, I darted out of there immediately. I had always tried to avoid the basement because I swear when I'm down there, there's something peeking around the corner looking at me. I started to see more things, but as the years flew by, I didn't care anymore. From white shadows walking through the hallway to black figures climbing the walls, my mum wasn't listening anymore and could care less about what I had to say, so I just tried to ignore it. The thumps at night were still happening, and the feeling of being watched never went away. The thing that scared me the most was when I was 13. I laid on my parents' bed as my mum was using the bathroom. I got to play on her flip phone, and I was excited. I relaxed and played Tetris while waiting for my mum to come out. All of a sudden, something strong and powerful decided to kick the bed, making it slightly move. I could see ripples from where it was hit. I was absolutely scared out my skin, and I jumped out. I bolted to the bathroom, and my mum had locked the doors. I began pounding and begging my mum to let me in, almost in tears. She begrudgingly opened it, and of course told me that it could have just been a spring in the bed popping. The Nevada house always carried this strong negative aura, evil almost. My stepfather and mother argued constantly, leading to him beating her and verbally and emotionally abusing us. It was like this entity thrived off it. We eventually moved out into a bigger 4-bedroom house with 2 levels. Walking into that house was like a breath of fresh air. No more thumps in the night, no more constantly feeling like I was being watched everywhere I went. It was relieving. My stepdad continued the abuse though. He was just a piece of crap that acted like a walking negative energy battery for any entities. When I was a kid visiting New Orleans, my family went to a voodoo shop. I wish I could remember the name, but it wasn't one of the tourist attraction ones. It was hard to find and not like all the others. Anyway, I thought it'd be cool to buy this little black doll made from cloth that had no face or features, just black cloth in human shape, stuffed and sewn together. It was sold as a voodoo doll of death, and thinking back on it, I feel pretty dumb taking something like that home with me. Once back, many weird things started happening to my whole family, until we eventually moved because of it. Hearing whispering in my room late at night in an unintelligible language was common. I also heard an angry man say my name behind my ear as I was turning on the living room TV. I literally felt his breath. None of this my family believed when I would tell them. I was under 12, so it's understandable. What changed this and made us move the next day is this. My mum saw an orb come up to her face when she was almost sleeping, and she said she couldn't breathe for almost a minute while it was in her face. Then it flew into the corner of the room and disappeared. When we moved close by, and the new people in the house we made friends with started saying that their kids were hearing whispers at night. We never told them about this before when they mentioned it, which is the crazy part. I'm not certain if this is all tied to the doll or not, but other stories I've heard have made me think it might be. When I was 16, I got a job as a personal assistant / cleaning lady for a very wealthy couple who lived in a big, beautiful mansion on Lake Michigan. It was a great job at the time, but after a while I had to quit because of everything that was going on. I made $12 an hour as a 16-year-old girl, and that was just crazy to me at the time. But now I know it's because the homeowners couldn't get anyone to stay and work for them. It could very well be because they're both major assholes, but I honestly didn't see them all that much during the school year, so it was fine. I would work 40 hours a week in the summer and part-time while I was in school. During the school year, I would hardly ever see the homeowners and would be left alone to clean the house. I had a key, alarm code, and gate code, so I could let myself in and out. In the summer months, I had help from a few other employees, but in the school year I did not. At first, I loved being in the house by myself. Don't get me wrong, the place was absolutely gorgeous, right on Lake Michigan, so I always would open the curtains to let the sunlight in and blast the surround sound speakers while I cleaned. It wasn't until I was by myself that I started noticing how weird this place was. Nothing ever exactly felt welcoming about the place. Sure, it was pretty to look at, but it was modern, and everything was hard marble and stone, not very homely feeling. My first experience happened when I was cleaning one day, in silence. I remember specifically not turning on the music, because I had a bad headache that day. All of a sudden, the speakers to the upstairs part of the house turned on. The way their speaker system works, you can control it by a touchpad in the kitchen, which would play the music everywhere besides the basement and master bedroom. To play music in those areas, you'd have to go to that touchpad and turn it on by controlling the pad and sync it up with the rest of the house. The reason that was so alarming was I was the only one there. I walked up the stairs to check out what was going on and figure out why and how the music had turned itself on seemingly by itself. I looked around and called out the homeowner's name, thinking someone came in without me noticing or something like that. But the doors were all still locked and no one was home. I shut off the music and went back downstairs, not thinking much of it. It started happening more often. I'd be listening to the music and it would turn off, or it would be off and would turn on in a completely different area of the house. I brushed it off as faulty and didn't think much of it. The second most prevalent story I remember from working was when I was cleaning the workout room in their basement. I never wanted to go in this room, and I really couldn't tell you why. Something about this room was weird. It was just super cold and dark, and I felt very anxious while being in there. I definitely tried to avoid it, but my boss would get mad when dust would build up, so I forced myself to go in there once a week to tidy up. I was in the workout room, using a broom and a mop, and I remember sweeping up the floor and prompting the broom against a machine while I used the mop. Suddenly the broom fell over, hitting the wall, the baseboard, and the floor as it fell, causing 3 distinct knocks. What I heard after scared me so badly, I refused to go back into the room by myself again. Immediately following the knocks made by the broom falling, 3 knocks responded in the exact same pattern the broom fell. But it was coming from inside the wall. I know what you're thinking, but no, it was not just an echo. It was not a scared animal. It was knocking. Deliberate knocking. I was completely alone in a big, quiet house in the middle of nowhere, and someone was knocking back at me from inside the wall. To this day, I have absolutely no explanation for what I experienced. Lastly, This was the first and only time I have ever seen anything paranormal with my 2 eyes. Then I know this time, it's not me being paranoid or crazy, because I was with a co-worker who saw it too. Sometimes, my boss would rent out her guest house, and we would clean it before the guests arrive. So this guest house has a glass hallway leading from one main area of the house to another. I was cleaning the glass while one of my co-workers, Bob, was standing next to me. Just then, I catch a glimpse of what looks like a boy in a blue shirt running by. I turned my head just as Bob turned his, and he asked if I had seen it too. Those are the craziest things that happened. It was nearly 6 years ago, and will always haunt me. I used to do contract security at the emergency room entrance of a downtown hospital, the graveyard shift. I would stand at a kiosk right inside the entrance and monitor access. Across from the kiosk were 2 sets of elevators. The first elevator on the right could only go up to the 3rd floor. The 2 floors above us were administrative floors, offices only, no patient areas. So on my shift, floors 2 and 3 were closed for the night. The elevator on the left I had to be especially trained to use. It serviced the same floors as the elevator, with the addition of a helipad on the roof. This is where life flight helicopters would land with life or death patients that had to be rushed to the emergency room. Security would be notified when a life flight was en route, and we'd take the elevator, use our access key, and go to the helipad. On the roof floor, we locked the elevator in the open position, so no one could summon it from another floor. The elevator would remain open and in position until the life flight crew had the patient inside and hit the floor 1 button. Security was not needed to assist the life flight crew. We would take the stairs down as soon as we had the elevator prepped on the helipad. It had been explained to me that the process was important and that people had died on the pad and even during the elevator ride down. I'm not a ghost person. I've never had haunting experiences, but that elevator behaved very oddly. Every night I worked, and the right side of the elevator that only serviced the 3 floors would rest on the 1st floor. Since it served floors that were not used during my shift, it just sat there on the main floor. I was required to check the 2nd and 3rd floors once a night. Whenever I went to the elevators, I never had to wait for the right elevator to get to my floor because it was already there. The left elevator that serviced the helipad and floors 2 and 3 had a mind of its own. All night it would go up and down from floor to floor with no one inside. You could watch the floor indicator for it. It bounced from floor to floor all night, and it would lower to the main floor, open with no one inside, close, and then go to floors 2, 3, or 5, the helipad. All this activity with no one inside it. The custodial crew was done on floors 2 and 3 by 10 p.m. Before my shift even started, there was no one around to use those elevators on my shift. On my nightly checks of the floors, I never saw anyone up there. The lights were even off. Not only that, but the left elevator would go all the way to the helipad by itself. You have to have an access key to even have that option. The other guards had no explanation. The hospital employees obviously didn't want to be seen as believing in a haunted elevator, and would change the subject or brush it off when I asked why the lift was so weird. But I would watch from the security kiosk all night, as that thing would go from floor to floor all shift. It would open up on the 1st floor across from me, and it was always empty. The other elevator that only went to floors 2 or 3 never moved unless another security officer used it. A number of years ago, my family moved into a new house in the countryside. It was a beautiful Georgian mansion, very rare and very old, beautifully maintained. The previous owners were selling it at a ludicrously low price, and my parents had always dreamed of owning a home like this, and so they obliged. It wasn't before long, probably within the first few days, that we figured something was off. The house needed a lot of work, restorative work. Lots of the wood had started to go moldy and definitely needed replacing. The previous owners obviously didn't live here, and as such, it had deteriorated considerably. In any case, my parents had a lot of work cut out for them, and it was while they were clearing rubbish away that we saw something spooky. We were all just moving things and putting what we wouldn't need in bin bags to throw it out. When down the hallway we looked up, and all four of us saw a little girl happily and obliviously skipping away into the darkness. My dad immediately called out, "Hey, what are you doing?" and run over to see who this girl was and why she was in the house. His assumption was that she thought this house was still abandoned, which it no longer was, and was trespassing, despite the fact there were now cars in the driveway. But upon a thorough search of the house, did he find nothing. Sightings of this little girl continued. There'd be some nights where I'd hear giggling down the hallway, or I'd hear my door creak open and see a pair of eyes staring at me before vanishing into the dark. Every one of my family members was afflicted by the curse of this little girl. Her infernal laughter, the fact that she breathed behind your head, and when you turn around she wouldn't be there. It was driving my parents mad. They tried to get in contact with the previous owners, but they had moved out of the country, and my parents were starting to see why. They did some local research and didn't find a lot about the house. But about 4 months later, when my mum was digging up the garden, did she unearth something unexpected. She found a shoe, and as she was pulling the shoe out of the ground, did she see that it was attached to a skeletal leg. The police were called, and it turns out that she had unearthed the remains of a small girl, probably no older than 6 to 8. This was a terrifying discovery. We paid for a casket and gave the little girl a funeral. Only after that did the activity truly die down. Not altogether though, just slightly minimized. As time went on, the activity nearly completely stopped, and we almost forgot that we had a ghostly inhabitant in our home. The house, as it turns out, was a lot harder for my parents to do than they originally thought. It needed so much more work and money than they were prepared to invest, and sadly had to sell the property and take a loss. I was glad to no longer be the plaything of some spiritual girl from the 5th dimension. The next house we moved into was completely ghost-free, and that's the way I think I'll have my life from here on out. My very young daughter started telling us that she would see a lady in our house 6 months ago, about the time she started to be able to communicate well. She said there was an older lady who she described as always wearing brown. We call her the lady. I showed my daughter pictures of her great-grandparents on both sides, thinking it was just a deceased family member, but she never recognized anyone. We started noticing sounds, like doors creaking, rustling sounds and things dropping, cabinet doors creaking. But everything we heard we thought could be potentially explainable. We started hearing things more frequently about 5 weeks ago. I saw a cabinet door in our bathroom swing open while I was brushing my teeth in the reflection of the mirror behind me. Again, super strange, but perhaps somehow potentially explainable. 2 days later, we had a massive water leak behind that same mirror. Due to the water leak, all of our belongings had to have been moved out of our house for the contractors to repair the damage. I've been cleaning and boxing stuff up, and I was boxing up one item in our room when I found 2 old photographs around the 1880s. As soon as I pulled them out, my daughter said, "That's the lady." I asked her which, and she pointed to the younger of the 2 women. We asked her 3 times throughout the day about the photographs, and each time she picked out the same lady. We also noticed the lady in the photo appeared to be wearing brown because of the type of photography. So we took the photographs out and moved them to my new art studio, which is on our property and still in progress. Since removing the old photographs, we have not heard one strange noise in our house. My oldest daughter never makes it through the night in her bed. She has complained since she was a little girl of moving shadows in her room at night. She has since slept every night in her room, all night, since the photographs have been removed. The daughter who sees the lady usually sees her once every week to 2 weeks, so we can't comment about that. Completely surprised by the drastic change in our house, I decided to use a dream/sleep recording app that only records when it hears sounds to see if I could catch something near the photographs in the studio. I mainly want to prove or disprove it to myself. I recorded Thursday afternoon for 3 hours and had 7 audio clips of birds and planes. I tried again Thursday night from 12 to 8 a.m. and this time I had 67 clips. Most of the clips were this weird reverb/electrical feedback that started at after midnight and went on and off for hours. I also heard what sounded like 2 separate single knocks or objects dropping. There was nothing electrical in the studio except the phone itself, as power has not been running in the building yet. There isn't even a breaker box. There's a power pole outside the building about 20 feet away from the front, and last night we left the recorder on from 11:30 to 7 a.m. Not one weird electrical sound all night. We literally caught crickets and one clip with 2 small bumps or knocks followed by rustling. We also caught a strange sound at the end of some clip. We don't remember how we came into possession of the photographs. They are not of our family. We confirmed this with our parents. My husband thinks he remembers that one of my customers gave them to me a few years ago. Almost 2 years ago, my boyfriend and I decided to move from one house to a much bigger one that had belonged to his aunt. At the time of the move, my son was 2 and my daughter just a few months. A few weeks after moving in, I noticed my son would get out of bed and walk down the hallway and not say anything, just stare at me. I would ask him if he needed something, but he would never respond. I'd pick him up and carry him back to bed. I assumed maybe he was just sleepwalking, since I also used to sleepwalk as a child. One night he wakes me up, and he's all in a panic, trying to get me to follow him into the living room. He would just keep randomly repeating, "Come on, Mummy, come on." So I get up, and we walk to the living room and the TV's on. It's just a static screen, so there's nothing playing and he's staring at me with a very blank expression. I assume he's sleepwalking again. I ask him if he turned the TV on, and he said no. And when I asked him if he could turn it off and show me how to do it, he couldn't find the power button and got frustrated that he couldn't figure it out. The TV I had at the time is made a little weird. The power button is located on the back side of it to the right, and I assume it wasn't him who turned it on, if he didn't even know how to turn it off, not to mention that he's 2. Fast forward a few months, and I'm in the kids' playroom sitting on the couch with my son, who fell asleep on my lap while watching a movie. I heard movement in the kitchen, So I get up to see if my boyfriend was awake to find no one there. It felt weird, like I was being watched. So I go back to the playroom and grab my son to put him in the bed. Over the next few weeks, I keep hearing people walking when no one is awake. One night we get home from a late night grocery shopping trip, and as I'm pulling bags out of the trunk of the vehicle, I hear someone humming. So I look around my yard to see if anyone is around or out for a late night stroll, which wouldn't make sense since I live on a random back road surrounded by woods. I walk around to the backyard and still see nothing. 1 week, my boyfriend's dad and stepmother decide to come and stay with us for a few days to visit. The first few nights, they were here and everything was normal. But then one night, something kind of weird happened. My daughter was being extremely grouchy and absolutely refusing to go to bed. So I'm up with her in the living room at 12, trying to rock her to sleep, and everyone else is already in bed. I finally get her to pass out at 1:30, lay her down and get myself in the bed. I climb under the comforter and pull out my phone to scroll through the internet, and hear something like someone crawling into my room on the floor around my bed, and over to my boyfriend's side where he's asleep. I'm a little creeped out, because I know it's not my daughter. She can't get out of the crib on her own. Then I think maybe my son is up, trying to sneak out of bed, but I'm still too nervous to look over there. So I get up and walk out the room to peek in on my daughter, and make sure she's still asleep, and then go down the hall to my son's room to see if he is still soundly asleep in bed. I get back to my bed and try to play it off, like I had probably just imagined it and needed sleep. The next morning, everyone's in the living room drinking coffee and just talking, and I look over at my boyfriend and ask him if he heard anything last night. He said no, he didn't wake up last night, but his stepmom chimes in with, "I heard you in the living room at 3 a.m. Does the baby usually keep you up that late?" I told her it wasn't me. I was already in bed. But I heard the baby banging around on the walls and moving toys. I assumed you were still up. I told her it wasn't us and that we'd already gone to sleep at that point. And now, currently, I keep having the dreams of myself laying in bed at night and a figure of someone just walking in the room and standing over me, only to wake up and realize it was a dream. Discomfort for sure, and I don't really have anyone to discuss this with, nor do my boyfriend's family have a belief in the paranormal. But I just really want to speak about it with someone, because it looks like I'm crazy. About 6 months ago, I received a haunted doll I bought off eBay. Now I have no idea whether this thing was actually possessed, but the previous owner claimed to have several bad experiences once she purchased it from a garage sale, claiming it smashed into her dinner room set when she was doing her hair in the bathroom. Walking out with a bat to investigate, only suspecting a break-in, only to find not a single sight of anybody or anything, and the dining ware and table was untouched. The next experience she had was when she was getting ready for bed and heard a noise coming from behind the chair. The doll was sitting in, and say a dark figure with red eyes glaring at her with anger. Anyway, onto my ownership. When I received the thing, I was fully aware that a possessed object may not show signs of any activity from a few hours up to a few months of being relocated. I never experienced anything. I let it sit on a shelf and collect dust, only remembering it physically exiting my house every once in a great while. I would just randomly think about it, and even when I was doing something completely unrelated or busy at the house. A few days ago, I had lit a burn pile in my backyard to get rid of a bunch of branches and logs, when for some reason, I had the idea to grab the doll and burn it to be done with it. I went back to grab it, and as soon as I touched it, my heart began racing, increasing with every step I took towards my back door. I'd finally made it outside to the fire and tossed it back, laying on the fire. Within seconds, it started smoking. As soon as it did, my heart stopped racing and I got relaxed. 30 seconds later, its hair and clothes were in full flames, and I watched it as it began to look like something out of a horror movie. The eyes melted and sunk into its ceramic head, and it was converted into a charred black soot until nothing but the head, arms and legs were left. I let the fire keep burning until all the wood had been burnt. My main question here is whether or not it was a good idea to burn a possessed object. If it is, I don't know what to think about it. Let me know what you guys think about my decision to set the thing alight. I've had some weird things happen to me in my life, and after moving out of a house where there was an incident involving black magic, we got the government quarters in a society that was exclusively for the families of individuals working in the forest department. It was a cheerful place unlike the last, and there were many kids around my age. My school was close, and it was a well-knit neighborhood with friendly people. So much so that I was able to trespass into anyone's house and they wouldn't mind. It was still one of the best places I had lived in, because more than anything, it was adventurous. There were tall Ashoka trees all around, many kucha houses, and an aura that was hard to beat. This place had an old world charm. The only unconventional part about the place was my house. It was of older times, probably built around British Indian era, and had a unique architectural style. The front hall had a flat roof, while the middle portion was raised in a dome, and at the very end, near the washroom and beyond, there was no roof. The first time we entered, there were many bizarre wall paintings in the middle portion that we didn't comprehend at all. There were 2 doors for the entry of the house, the front one and the one at the very back that opened in front of a fence, and behind that was a forest. There was a blackened dead tree across that had been the victim of lightning. We had a beautiful garden that was adjacent to the house with lemon and custard apple trees at the end of it. It was our storehouse, and we didn't know who lived there before. The caretaker didn't tell us much, other than the person moved somewhere else. Still, we didn't want to take any risks and had a holy ritual performed on the property before we lived there. It was an interesting place. I made new friends, and we used to play in the society compound all day long after school. The forest office was in the society itself near the main gate. The place was surrounded with rocky terrains and forest. As kids, we explored a lot, and I often saw soldiers from afar marching around behind the terrains. There was another forest office in the compound, which was old and closed forever. It was locked, and the old office almost in front of my house, at a diagonal distance, was built on an elevated stage. It had high walls and a rotting structure. It was a home to many mossy outgrowths, and it had no roof either. By the side of it was a burnt house that had been abandoned. Nobody went there. It was instructed by the temple priest and his wife, as there was a black dog that lived there that had gone mad. We used to obey that, as it was near the forest, so poisonous snakes and monkeys were a daily sight, and we'd gotten used to it. The monkeys came every evening at 5 o'clock, and I had some really funny incidents with them. One day we were playing cricket near the old office, when an older boy played an aerial shoot to the building. There was no roof, so the ball went in, and I was sent to retrieve it. I climbed on the edges of bricks that were jutting out of the terrain adjoining to the office, and entered from above. It was a very creepy place, with a deadening black smell all around. I found some bones lying in the trash, probably left by dogs. I came out, went about my business, but there was something off. The next day in the morning, my mum came to us as we were talking about some news. She had a dream last night where she saw a lot of buried treasure in our house. It was in the back wall of our storehouse, and also there was some voice that guarded it. She saw someone digging there in the dream, a faceless man. We all went into the garden and opened the storehouse, and the wall at the back was put up again. Someone did try to break it down. It wasn't painted and was mere bricks and cement, albeit thicker than the other ones. My mum didn't proceed further. She said that she heard the voice in her dream saying that to acquire the gold, one had to sacrifice their children, and it couldn't be escaped or bargained with, and she wasn't willing to take such a chance. We went inside in a few minutes and heard someone at the door. It was our neighbor that lived far in front near the main gate adjacent to the new office. He had walked all the way down to our place, and it was early in the morning. It was a bit surprising because we didn't have much interaction with him. He had a confused expression, and he saw my mum and aunt and said, "You'll find this funny, but I had a dream about your house." He told us the exact same dream that my mum said, and even the same location. It was very strange. While we were all talking, we saw another girl walk towards us. She lived near the terrain, and to our surprise, even she had the same dream. Everyone wanted us to investigate now, but Mum was in no mood. One thing that she wanted to do was know about the place. The caretaker was questioned, and he revealed that the person who lived there was of Anglo-Indian descent. He lived here some 22 years back and was a treasure explorer. He knew of the treasure in this place and tried to search for it. It was said that he sacrificed his own son to get the wealth, but wasn't able to bear the guilt and went crazy and disappeared. The broken wall was put up by someone at night the day he disappeared. No one saw who did it. The man had murdered his son right in front of our washroom in the last section that opened near the forest. It gave me shudders, because there were frequent power cuts in those days at night, and I used to take long showers at midnight. The idea of something lurking and guarding the walls and adjacent treasure were enough to give me chills. We mutually decided to do nothing about it, and left town later that year. My boyfriend's grandfather is an antique collector, and one of his interests are dolls, porcelain to be exact. They picked this up, and the previous owners said to be very careful with it because it was special. Completely unfazed by this statement, he didn't ask any further questions. He brought it home with him about 2 weeks ago. The first 3 days were fine, and it stayed in the kitchen. The following day, my boyfriend and I were laying in our room down the hall talking. It was around midnight when suddenly 3 light knocks were heard through the door. We look at each other, and from the other side I hear his grandfather say his name. I get up and open the door while he was getting ready for whatever task his grandfather had in store for him. Upon opening the door, I expected to be brought face to face with him, but no one was there. I closed the door and shrugged it off, but after I closed the door, I could hear footsteps from down the hall, so I go out to investigate. But in the distance, I can hear both the grandparents snoring. The following day, around the same time, all power to the house was lost and didn't return till 5 or 6 a.m. Thankfully, throughout that night, one lamp was on. I don't know how, but occasionally it went out. But for the most part, somehow, it was still being powered. A few more nights go by without anything happening, until just a few nights ago, all through the night there were screams, not in the house but right outside. Last night, at around 2 to 3 a.m., I was laying down watching videos when my boyfriend sat straight up, rambled gibberish mixed with numbers. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he was okay, looked me dead in the eyes, screamed and threw himself back and continued snoring. I asked him about it earlier today, and he has no memory of it. His grandfather is taking the doll to his shop tomorrow, and hopefully, things will go back to normal. After he took it out the house and put it in his antique shop, the air seemed heavy and everyone is easily irritated. Usually the family is upbeat, kind of an I can conquer anything kind of attitude. I've also had a few hyper-realistic dreams. One where I was drowning, another where I was burned alive, and another where I was pulled apart, and another one where I was captured and shown my new face as I didn't have one. There was a tall man there that said, "Look at the beauty I have created." Unnerving to say the least. My flatmates and I moved into a gorgeous house 2 months ago. Roughly 2 weeks in, we started hearing boot steps in the hall and on the front porch. We are in close proximity to the neighbors, but I doubt it's them we're hearing at 3, 4, and 5 a.m. Since moving in, I feel like I'm being watched when I'm in the shower. Just over 2 weeks ago, I was laying in bed watching videos on my phone when I felt something tugging at my charger cable. We don't have any pets, and ever since then things have gotten progressively worse for me. I hear muffled voices outside my room at night, and I've checked them out on plenty of occasions, and there's no one there. And I can't hear anything from the neighbors either. On a night that I find myself home alone, i.e. without my boyfriend, I tend to have quite explicit dreams, though never with my boyfriend, and I wake up feeling guilty. If I'm at my boyfriend's though, they're always about being chased or messed up houses with traps and not being able to get away. When I'm home, I wake up with bruises that were not there before when I went to bed. I had one on my inner thigh, both. Some on my upper arms, just blotches of bruising. I know I can be clumsy at times, but I know if I've hurt myself. I pulled an all-nighter just over a week ago to do some work for a website that's launching soon, and I saw someone's head and shoulders around the corner from the dining room at about 5:30 to 6 a.m. Only one of the flatmates was awake. I asked if it were him, and he said it wasn't. Last week, I went to pull the lounge curtains because there was glare on the TV. I had my door open to air my room out because I'd been away for a few days, and I saw the palm of an androgynous hand waving at me. I told my flatmate, and he said that they were going to check it out. We stepped into my room, and we were instantly freezing, breathing fog and all. It doesn't feel like my room anymore, it just feels wrong. That night, I decided I was sleeping on the couch in the lounge. But come roughly 5 a.m., just as I was drifting off to sleep, I hear something tapping at the keyboard. All our computers are in the lounge, or we would never see each other because of work schedules. And I was the only person there, and as previously mentioned, we don't own pets. My computer was off though, so I couldn't see anything. However, it was staying on at night with a blank document open. All of this means I'm having a lot of trouble sleeping. And then just now, I heard 4 rather heavy raps at the window. I really don't want to look, and I'm not going to. I know there's something wrong in this house. So things at the new house have still been going on, and in some respects are picking up. The other day I left my phone on my desk while I went to the bathroom. When I returned, I noticed that my phone was half removed from the faceplate. Everyone else was either asleep or at work at this point, as the flat comprises, for the most part, of night shifts. About a week later, I had gone out the front door for a cigarette, as there was a pretty decent storm blowing. and the backyard offers no protection in a southerly. I had locked the door behind me when I came inside, because I was the only person home. Just over an hour late. I heard the front door open and close, and I went out to greet whichever flatmate had come, thinking that someone had finished work early. But I couldn't find anyone in the house, and the front door was now unlocked. About 4:30 the following morning, I was sitting at my computer in the lounge when my right shoulder got very cold. I peered sideways at my shoulder and almost noticed that a single strand of my hair was bouncing up and down, almost as if someone was pulling a pig's tail. I spent a few weeks away from home, and last night was my first night back in the house. At 1 a.m. today, I went to go to the bathroom before going to bed. As I pushed open the bathroom door, I saw a black, shadowy figure standing by the window. I thought nothing of it, as I was half asleep. But as I went to sit down, I noticed that the bathroom scales were going through the tarring process. These are electric scales and have to be stepped on to turn on. But ever since you move, they have to be lifted slightly for them to register that you want to use them. After questioning the flatmates that were home at the time, I found that no one had been in that bathroom previously to me. And seeing that I use the scales regularly, I know that they only stay on for about 30 seconds after use, or 15 seconds if not being used after tarring. At midday today, I went to the loo, then decided I would shower as I needed to wash my hair for the weekend. I went to get my towels and hairbrush from the sleep out, and when I came back, I went to turn the door handle to quietly close the bathroom door behind me, so as to not wake up my flatmate in the next room with banging doors after his graveyard shift, only to discover that the bathroom door had been locked. I'm thankful I hadn't completely shut the door behind me, not even 5 minutes previously, seeing as it was only he and I home. I hadn't worried about locking the door while using the loo, and also while I was showering, I noticed that a leg to the onesie that was hanging on the back of the door was sort of jerking around at odd intervals, but none of the towels or my gowns, which were also hanging on the door, had been moved at all. The weird dreams are still happening, albeit less frequently, while I was at my sister's place. This place still feels terrible. I sleep with my light on, and documentaries playing on YouTube on my phone. But thankfully, I haven't woken up with any new bruises in the last few weeks. This happened about 12 years ago, when I was about 11. It was the day after Christmas, and my mum and stepdad and I were sitting in the living room watching TV. It was past 9 p.m, and my little brother had already gone to bed. Now, my brother and I had gotten remote control cars for Christmas, that kind that had rechargeable batteries in both car and remote. As we were watching TV, my car, that had been in the middle of the living room floor, starts making a noise like it's turned on. At this point, all three of us look at it and witness it drive around in circles twice to make a perfect 3-point turn, then park up against the wall. We all kind of just look at each other, and my mum goes to check on my brother, as he was supposed to be in bed. She comes back looking a bit concerned, saying my brother is flat out, and when he sleeps, he really sleeps. There's no faking the bear snores he gives off. So she then asks me and my stepdad whether we were playing a prank. We both deny it. My stepdad even pointing out that the controllers to both cars had been on the side table where my brothers and I left them after playing with them earlier in the evening. My mum proceeds to check both controllers and the cars for batteries. All the batteries were in the charging docks, plugged into the wall, and we had run the batteries out while playing with them earlier. My mum, brother and I had some strange experiences in this house, but this was by far the strangest I have ever experienced personally. I can't think of a logical explanation for this. I've always thought perhaps it was a ghost. My girlfriend and I both attend university, and we live in a relatively old apartment building in the town of St. Cloud, Minnesota. The building was constructed around the 70s, and though it's nice, something about it gives off an extremely eerie feeling, almost a dark, heavy feeling. But since rent is cheap and is close to campus, we moved in anyway. Let me preface and say that we live on the second floor of the building and have neighbors above and below us. We have never met our neighbors, oddly enough, but assume they are just older residents. We are both true believers of the paranormal and have always been curious about it. My girlfriend has never experienced anything paranormal firsthand, but for me, I have seen odd things throughout my life that I can't explain, and this experience happens to be one of them. This story begins as any normal night. We got done moving in and unpacking our things and decided to take a break and relax for the rest of the night. We were watching Netflix and we paused the movie and started to hear a loud banging sound above us, almost as if someone were constantly picking up and dropping heavy things. We look at each other and my girlfriend says, "Maybe someone's moving in upstairs?" We didn't immediately think it was paranormal, so we ignored it. A few days go by, and the banging started to happen around the same time it did the first. For some reason we weren't creeped out or anything like that. We just thought this time was the only time that people above us could move in, because maybe they got off work at that time. Later on, the same night, while getting ready for bed, we heard overly loud footsteps as if someone had heavy steel-toed boots and was purposely stomping their feet against the ground. While in bed, we all of a sudden hear a blood-curdling scream coming from a female upstairs. It was so loud, we could have sworn it was from right beside us. So we jolted awake and both had pale looks on our faces. We were terrified. We thought we should call the police, but decided not to. Perhaps it was a movie they were watching, but it was just too loud to be a movie. One morning I was in the bathroom getting ready to go to work, and I hear a faint cry coming from the same female voice, as if she were crying in the bathtub or somewhere near the bathroom since it was right above me. I then hear doors slamming and drawers constantly opening and closing. This sound goes on for another few minutes, and all of a sudden it's dead silent. My girlfriend wasn't around at the time, but she still believed me. No sounds of movement or crying/screaming since then, and it's been silent for a few days now. The next week, my girlfriend and I decide to go to the front desk of the apartment building and tell them about the sounds we'd been hearing in our apartment. The reception lady looks at us confused and begins to hesitantly tell us that nobody has moved into the apartment and that it hasn't had a tenant in over 2 years. Dumbfounded, we ask if anyone could have broken in and caused the sounds, and the lady reassured us that if someone were to break into the apartment, the alarm would go off, alerting local authorities and the building's security. But they never had any alarms go off, nor did we hear any. We can't help but think what's going on there, and we decide to do our own investigation work and do some research at the local library in town. I didn't find anything that mentioned a murder had occurred in or around the area we live in, and to this day I'm still trying to find answers. We do hear the sound on occasion, but knowing that absolutely no one lives up there just creeps us out even more. We don't know what to do and can't break our lease. It's the middle of the semester, and we were too scared to sometimes even step foot in that apartment building. My grandmother on my mother's side was always considered to be our family's crazy one. Long before I was born, the marriage to my mother's father had failed because my grandmother was far too interested in witchcraft. My grandmother really liked astrology. This was considered witchcraft to my grandfather's very Catholic family. Growing up, she used to tell me stories about the fairies that lived in her garden, and how I should never leave my shoes outside at night, for the gnomes may steal them. As any child of the 90s, I was in love with Disney. So all of Grandma's stories seemed to be just that, stories. There were always rules to being at Grandma's house. Most certainly not your typical ones. Things like leave the windows open at night so the frogs can come in. And be sure not to step on any of the frogs. If you bake something, you must leave a small piece for the fairies, or things will start to go missing. Odd rules, but as a kid it was fun. Now my grandmother was a hoarder for my entire life. The type who has a trail from one end of the house to the other. Everything else was stacked floor to ceiling. She never hoarded trash. It was always useful things, just things she was probably never going to use herself, but needed to have just in case. And food. Oh Lord, did that woman hoard food. My grandmother grew up during the Great Depression, constantly having to move around and leave everything she owned behind each time. Once she grew up and was able to create her own stability, she started hoarding. My mother says my grandmother started hoarding when my mother was a teen, and never stopped. Most of the things she would collect came from Goodwills, flea markets, garage sales, and pretty much unwanted second-hand crap. Something else I feel as though I should mention. I am the youngest child of 3. My 2 older siblings are my half-siblings. My sister and I share the same father, and brother and I share the same mother. My brother was around 4 or 5 when my parents met, meaning I wasn't the first grandchild my grandma had, but I was the only one she seemed to like. My siblings were never invited to her house, or really welcome to be there at all. My grandmother treated my siblings as though they didn't exist. Me, on the other hand, she would call my parents constantly to ask when we were going to be in the valley next, and if they would like to bring me to her house to spend the weekend. Neither of my other siblings ever stayed the night at Grandma's house. I feel as though the above information is important as to why I'm making this post. I was 13 at the time I brought him home. I had spent a weekend with that grandmother while my parents were staying at another relative's house not far from there. This was pretty normal, as stated before. I seemed to be the only family member she liked. Well, that weekend my grandmother gave me a music box / porcelain doll. I collected porcelain dolls, so I didn't think anything of it, the fact that she was giving me a new one. She told me to take care of him, that he's very special, and I needed to be sure to give him the love and attention he deserves. I was instructed to wind and play him at least once a month. Okay, whatever you say, Grandma. My mother and her ended up having a falling out, and I was told that if I wanted to see her or speak to her, I would have to find my own way of doing so. But as far as my mother was concerned, she was dead to our family. Still to this day I have no idea what their falling out was over. Now there's a whole lot to be covered between the time period of 13 to 18. The strangest of them all was at 15 I had to have an emergency neck surgery. A mass had appeared and started cutting off blood flow to my brain. If I hadn't have gone to the hospital for my neck being sore, I could certainly have died. Fast forward to Mother's Day 2011. I'm 18 at the time. Every 4 years or so, my grandmother's birthday would fall on Mother's Day, and did so on that day. I hadn't talked to her for a few years at that point, since I wasn't allowed to use the house phone to contact her, and for the longest time no one would give me her phone number. So I got her number and called her, and the conversation went like this. Hey Grandma, it's me. I just wanted to call you to wish you a happy birthday and Mother's Day. Do you have anything special going on? Oh goodness, I thought I'd never get to speak to you again. I'm surprised that bitch mother of yours let you call me. Yeah, I'm sorry I haven't called sooner, but I've really missed you, Grandma. How would you feel about me making a trip up there to see you soon? Oh, that would be wonderful. We can finally talk about all the things your mother has been hiding from you. She's been lying to you your whole life about who you really are. Don't deny it. Embrace it. You need to confront your mother and demand she tell you what she's been keeping from you. Oh, okay, Gran. So, what do you think of me coming to see you soon? I'd really like to catch up with you. I've missed you so much. Do you think you'd come to my high school graduation next month? Yes, you should definitely come see me. Can you come this next weekend? No, I don't think I can, but I'll try. After a very long silence, do you still have him? Who? The jester? Yeah, I do. Why? Bring him with you. Oh, alright, Grandma. Well, I'll have to go soon because I'm making dinner tonight. But I love you, and I'll call you again soon. I attempted to call her again a few weeks later to see if she could attend my graduation. She didn't answer. My other phone calls over the next few months were unanswered as well. She died that December. Which brings me to my whole point of this post. The doll she gave me I've had for 10 years now. I've had a lot of unexplainable experiences I'd prefer to keep private, but I'd be willing to share those more on a one-to-one basis if they could possibly help. But as far as the noticeable activity that I and my partner witnessed are as follows. Night terrors start. If it's not in our bedroom or sleeping space, like the absolute worst I've ever had. Things go missing and turn up in places they should not have been in. It will go through months of sitting alone on a shelf, not being wound or played, but will constantly play single notes or small parts of the song. And then there's our new dog. He can't stand it. He will wake up from a dead sleep and start blinking and growling like crazy at it. I have a video of him doing so. I have depression and think back to when I first started to feel the way I do. It was around the time the doll came into my life. I guess what I'm getting at is I need help, figuring out if there really is something going on or if I'm just crazy. Help to bring him and myself to peace again. There's a whole lot that I wanted to say but haven't been able to, and would be more than willing to talk to someone if they think they can help. And please, don't recommend Sage. You don't think I've tried that? When I was about 8, we moved into this rundown house, which I later found out that the entire area used to be a First Nation camp, but there was a huge landslide some 100 years ago, and so the entire area is pretty much houses and a baseball stadium built over an ancient burial ground, and doors would slam and my dad was thrown from the wall point to point. The basement was terrifying and had a chain lock on it, and while my mother was in the bath I decided to close the door since it creeped me out, but when I shut it, it slammed back open and hit me in the face violently. Those are just some of the examples from what happened in that house, and when we moved out, my dad and sister took down drywall in the basement and found satanic symbols all over the walls and an odd odor which had a passageway to hell written on it. So, turned out the previous tenants were Satan worshippers and the landlord knew, so we got the hell out of there. I know it sounds insane. It's insane to me too, but I think something attached itself to our family from that house. When I was 11, I was looking for my shoes when I opened a cupboard in the basement, and I felt someone breathe on my neck, and a male voice whisper, "Thank you," in my ear. That same year, my dad and I were in the kitchen at around 1 a.m, and he all of a sudden looked terrified as he's staring at nothing. I've never seen my dad so scared, and the room went cold. I'm not a religious person, but I started praying, that prayer that goes, "Our Father." My dad was turned away from me, and I was mouthing the words so he didn't know what I was saying. but he turned around after a few minutes and said, "I don't know what you said, but you saved us." And he refused to tell me what was there, and to this day refused to talk about what happened. He was crying and shaking, and it's the only time I've ever seen him like that. When he got his new apartment after him and my mother split up, I went to stay with him for a few days, and during that time we would hear weird noises and things would go missing everywhere. We were sitting in his kitchen facing the stove since we heard a noise, and right in front of our eyes we watched as the salt shakers went flying off the stove. For some reason, nothing paranormal ever happens around my mother, just around myself and my father and older sister. I'm 17 and my sister is 26, and like my mum, my 9-year-old brother has not had a thing happen to him either. On a side note, though my sister saw a psychic who told her that her dead boyfriend was attached to her, along with something else that felt evil, which is why we came to the conclusion that something had followed us from that house. When I was 13, my mother and brother and I moved in with my mum's old friend. Things kept happening, but now that my dad and sister weren't with me, it only happened to me. I was standing in the kitchen home alone when a fork flew across the kitchen and hit the wall. But when I went to see where it fell, there was nothing there. Another time I was laying in bed with what seemed to be sleep paralysis, but something grabbed my ankles and physically started dragging me off my bed. By the time I could move, I was almost completely falling off the bottom of the bed, and I in no way could have moved myself down there as I had zero control over my limbs. When I was 15, we moved into my current house, my mother, brother and I, and things were quiet for a while. Every time we move, it seems like things would calm down before resuming. Honestly, my theory is that every time we move, these entities have to find us again. The first time that something happened in this house, I was standing in the living room and a picture flew across the room and shattered. When my mum and brother are out, someone will play the piano at 3 a.m. And I know for a fact it isn't my cats, since it's usually two-handed melodies that last anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes. Here's the part that confirmed my theory, at least to me, that something had followed us. I was laying in bed not trying to sleep, but I had the lights off and my eyes closed from a headache, when I felt someone breathing on me and heard a voice whisper, "It's mine." But it was the same voice that spoke to me before I was 11. I would recognize it anywhere. I freaked out and placed cups of salt in various places in my room, along with different crystals given to me by my mother, an Aboriginal friend. Now, look, this next part I'm not proud of. I knew I was insanely stupid, but on my part I'm a kid, and kids do dumb things. A while after I heard the voice, I went to a bonfire and was drinking, though only coolers, as, at a max, it was around 3, and I was not drunk. So I went to my friend's house to sleep. She is First Nation and communicates with spirits through a Ouija board. Her and my other friends wanted us to use one of them, and I stupidly agreed. It answered us, and I can't remember what exactly was said, but I do remember her asking, "Do you like Allison?" So me, and the board said no, and then yes when asked again. But around this time my chest became very constricted and I found it hard to breathe. I was hyperventilating and crying, and felt like I couldn't get any air into my lungs. They told me I was freezing cold, and my pupils weren't responsive. They ended up calling the ambulance, who ruled it as a panic attack. But the thing is, while I do experience panic attacks and pretty bad anxiety, my panic attacks are widely different than that, and I was completely calm and not anxious whatsoever. So that leads us to what happened a few days ago, and I'm pretty worried that the Ouija board may cause this to get worse. So ever since I put salt in my room, nothing paranormal has happened in my bedroom. and so I began to feel safe in here, which I guess I shouldn't have let myself fall into that false security. I was sitting on my bed, my headboard against my window, and I have my blinds closed and a blanket over my headboard so that no one could look into my room, when I heard something tap against the window. I heard it for a few minutes, so I turned around and saw out the window. At first I saw nothing, but then there was something pressed up against the glass in the shape of a head. My light was on, so I couldn't make out any features, but it seemed as though they were wearing a hood, and that it was hiding its face from me. I thought it was someone trying to break in, so I started screaming, and we called 911. The police came and brought us outside to show us that there were no footprints in the snow whatsoever. Not to mention my window is too high for someone to be face level with without a ladder or chair. So what else could it be other than paranormal? I know what I saw. I stared this thing down for at least 10 to 15 seconds as I was frozen with fear. My mum called her First Nation friend who was going to come and smudge our house in a few days for us. But other than that, I don't know what else to do. I'm terrified, looking over my shoulder constantly and having to look out my window to make sure nothing else happens out there. If anyone has any advice or idea of what is happening, please help. I know this sounds crazy, but it's the truth. A number of years ago, me and my boyfriend went on holiday to Mexico. We were looking around the pyramids on one of our tours, and as we're getting back to our hotel, my boyfriend sneaks me off to the side, away from the tour guide, and shows me something he has in his pocket. By his face, he had been itching to tell me for a while. I thought he'd been acting funny, and that's when he pulls out a small rock. I look at it without much interest, and go back to hearing the tour guide, when he pulls me over again and says, "Listen, I got this from the ruins." I give him a puzzled look. "Why would you do that?" I say. "I thought it was really cool. To have a piece of history with us forever. We can put it in our house." I give him a faint smile. I wasn't really sure why he decided to take a random rock home, but I didn't think it was such a terrible thing. Anyway, that night, I had the worst dreams ever. I dreamt that I was seeing my closest friend Abby with only one arm. She was trying to tell me something, but it was like she was underwater, frantically waving her arm and stump, and I woke up in a cold sweat and it really freaked me out. I called her up back home, but she was still asleep. Figures. I tried going back to sleep, but there was a deep-rooted sense of fear in my gut, and something was preventing me from sleeping with ease. I tossed and turned, and then my boyfriend poked me in the side. I instantly turned and asked him what was wrong. He said he had a horrible dream that my friend Abby only had one arm. This freaked me out a little. I hadn't said anything out loud. Even when I tried attempting the call, I didn't leave a voicemail or a message of any kind. There was no way he could have known or heard me. I brushed this off as a simple coincidence, but for the next 3 nights I didn't sleep well, and a general feeling of unease overcame me. We had a few days left of the holiday still, and one afternoon, as I was sitting up in my room waiting for room service as I wasn't feeling all that well, did I see a shadow, about half the size of a normal person, dart from our bed to the bathroom. I was reading a book at the time, and I just about crapped myself. I don't move, feeling completely vulnerable. I just stare at the corner where it went towards the bathroom and listen and wait. Minutes pass, and with trepidation, I scoop myself off the bed and look past the corner. There's nothing there, no one to be alarmed about, and I start to get scared. That's when I see the rock my boyfriend took from the ruins. It's just on the glass table in front of the TV. And I wonder, all of this started when he brought the rock. Could it be? I go downstairs to rejoin my boyfriend a little while later and start speaking to him about the rock and asked him what made him want to bring it. He confessed he just thought it was cool and would be something fun to show the lads. I gave him a snort and went to speak with the bartender and get another drink. We started a conversation and I steered it towards culture and history, and then finally towards the ruins. I wanted to be subtle, and I said that I heard of the people that took objects from ruins like rocks and stuff. His demeanor changed from the happy, pleasant tone we were conversing in prior, and he looked at me and said, "Did you take something from the ruins?" "No," I said, lying through my teeth. "Good. They say that those who take from the sacred sites are haunted by alushes." I asked him what this funny word meant, and he said that in Mexican culture, they are these tiny dwarf-like spirit things that can drag your soul to the ground and kill you if you're not careful, but they are not to be trifled with. I understood them to be somewhere between a ghost and a bogeyman, but I took his warning very heavily, as I had seen something half the size of a man earlier that day. I told my boyfriend later in the evening that I was having misgivings about him having taken the rock, and convinced him that the best thing to do would be to return it. So he begrudgingly agreed, and we took the same tour again, albeit with a different tour company to not be suspicious, and he returned the rock exactly where he found it. I'm happy to say the rest of our vacation was spirit-free, and the feeling of unease lifted. Whether the feeling was in my mind or not is another matter, but I know that I saw that shadow dart from our bed to the bathroom, and it's something I'll never forget. Don't go pilfering sacred sites, people. You never know if you might bring more home with you than you expected. This period of my life started out as something very positive, but quickly spiraled into one of the darkest periods of my life, and the whole thing just feels like a blur in my memory. I started dating this girl that loved the show Paranormal. She had a pentagram tattoo on her, but she didn't even know what a pentagram was when I met her. It was essentially a symbol from the show that looked very similar to a pentagram. Things were great at first. I got a job at a warehouse working the night shift, and shortly after, I was able to get a cheap 3-bedroom in the city. I loved the apartment, and I loved her. Our relationship was great at first, so I get the rental agreement signed and we move in. I have 2 beagles, and I had just brought in their little dishes that they eat and drink out of, and I set them down on the kitchen table, and immediately the damn thing flies off the table before my very eyes. I didn't know what to make of it, so I just let it go. It freaked us out, but her more than me, because honestly I didn't really believe in ghosts until I lived here. I knew strange things could happen, but I just thought there must be some other explanation. The first major incident I can think of involved a brand new towel cabinet in the bathroom. I had just washed about 10 towels and put them in said cabinet. Now mind you, this cabinet smelled like fresh wood, and my towels smelled like fresh laundry. Well, the next day, that cabinet was saturated with the smell of death or rot. It freaked us out, but again, I wasn't jumping to conclusions, and anything could have been the cause of the smell. The smell was isolated to the cabinet. I seeped in my towels and re-washed them. The smell was gone the next day. Seems to me like an animal died in the wall, and the smell wouldn't go away. At this point, we had heard the place is haunted from the upstairs neighbor. Apparently, A 7-foot tall shadow man in a hat had been seen. Neighbors' friends saw it and would not come down to the house due to fear anymore. Whatever this entity was, it seemed to have a sort of obsession with my dogs, and the dog's bowl in particular. So I'm at work, it's about 3 a.m, and I'm in receipt of a frantic phone call from my girlfriend. She didn't work and just stayed home all day and night, so she experienced most of this. She was in tears, and so scared she could barely get the words out. Honestly, it still makes me feel the same type of way, remembering how scared she sounded. She was in the living room, which was a big space, essentially half the apartment connected to the kitchen, which was essentially the other half, chilling with the dogs on the couch, when she heard a knock in the kitchen. My dog, Scout, perked up and starts growling and staring in the kitchen like there was an intruder. She's looking, and before her eyes, the dog dish in the kitchen very slowly starts sliding across the kitchen floor. She basically went into shock out of fear, but called me in, and I came home and did what I could, which was basically nothing, and put the dog bowl in its spot and went back to work. 10 minutes later, I got another call. The dish moved again. Her mother picked her up, and she spent the night away. The sun was up, and I got home, and the house always felt safer when the sun was up, so I just went to sleep. The front patio light started going on and off by itself. It was creepy, but again, nothing too crazy. My one dog seemed to never see the entity, but my other dog would always have this terrified expression on her face and would behave as if another person were in the house. The upstairs neighbor was going through the attic and found some weird-ass note in the prior tenant's belongings that said, "Madark is God." I gurgled Madark, and it turns out that it was some ancient Babylonian god. I bring up to the landlady that the place is haunted, and she confirms it. Cool, thanks for telling me that after I moved in. Shortly after, my ex starts hearing disembodied voices, a man whispering in her ear from directly behind her when she was in the bathroom. My voice calling to her when I'm asleep rooms away, and footsteps around the house. Tables flipping over in the living room in the middle of the night, causing me to storm out my bedroom ready to whoop some burglar to find nothing but an overturned table. Whatever this thing was, it was horribly negative. This wasn't just some haunting where a ghost is doing random things. It had a mind, and it seemed to be doing things that caused stress and negativity to take hold on my relationship. When things were good at home, the paranormal activity would rack it up, and then when things got bad for us, it would go dormant. It felt like it always had to keep everyone in the house at each other's throats. When I first moved in there, a moment didn't pass where it didn't feel like some unseen person was staring at me hard. I just always got that sensation, and it was unnerving. So then the nightmares and scratches started for me, every single night. I would have horrible, horrible night terrors, violent dreams filled with people I loved dying and people in general being hurt. I would wake up with long red scratches all over my body and would constantly wake up pouring sweat and calling out because the dreams were so intense. I honestly can't remember the last time I had a nightmare before I moved into this place, and thankfully, now that I have moved out, the nightmares have stopped. Fast forward a little bit, and I have a meeting for work that I can't miss. I plan to leave an hour earlier just to be safe, except my keys had vanished. I look for them, and it starts to get closer to start shift and I'm panicking. I never lose my keys, and at this point, I'm ripping the place apart, ripped the cushions off the couch and can't find them. I left the place a bit of a mess and got the neighbor to drive me to work. She picked up the cushions, put them back and went to the bathroom, heard a bang, and went out to see my keys neatly placed in the center of the couch cushion, which she had just put back. It was unreal. This told me this thing was calculating, and at this point I knew it was actually trying to harm me. If I didn't make it to work, I would have lost my job, and it somehow chose this one day of all to do this. unreal. Now I want to mention this because it fits the whole trend of the house attracting and fueling negative energy. The upstairs neighbor was this chick. Not a bad girl, but she had this deadbeat boyfriend that never worked and pretty much just laid around and did drugs 24/7 and mooched off her. Years ago, this guy had ended someone's life over the last hit of acid. It was ruled manslaughter, and he served his time and was released. And a week after we moved in, my girlfriend caught him peeping through our window at her. Creep. So come to find out that my neighbor on his left, his family owned the house he was in, the house we were in, and the house to the right. Apparently all three of them were haunted. So to make a long story short, my relationship spiraled out of control. She left me, it had become toxic, and was for the best, and I don't blame her for anything. I have to accept that I messed things up, but that house added that last bit of stress on top of real life stress that pushed it all over the edge. I believe the entity fueled the flames when things were good, and would go dormant when things were bad. There really is a lot more to tell you about that place, but in all, it certainly wasn't a good place to live. I work for a non-profit that helps mentally and physically disabled people live fulfilling lives. John and Chris are brothers. I work for the same company as Chris, but at a different house. There are several houses around the city and bordering area. He works at one that houses children. Only children. 4 of them, I believe. His story begins on a graveyard shift, which he was working with one co-worker, a middle-aged woman. The house has alarms on the doors and windows, which are alarmed during the night, to let them know if any kids are trying to leave when they shouldn't be. Chris was downstairs in the office. His co-worker was upstairs cleaning. Suddenly, all the alarms in the house went off, every door and window. He sprang up, assuming the clients were planning a mass breakout, as he would later refer to it. He yelled to his co-worker to head out one door, and he went out the other frantically looking for whoever was outside. He saw one client standing beneath a tree but not apparently in a hurry. He thought he recognized the client to be someone called Barry. "Barry, head back inside," he said, or something to that effect. He continued searching for the other clients, but after running around in a panic, found no one. He gave up and headed inside to reconvene with his co-worker. He said he found Barry but no one else. She stunned him when she revealed that everyone was inside, having never left, including Barry. He said she must be mistaken. He was outside a big tree in the backyard. She wore her fear on her face when he insisted this. She explained how what he saw was in fact what staff of the house refer to as white dress, a ghostly woman wearing all white that seems to reside on the property and is often seen under that tree. Needless to say, he was surprised and confused and definitely creeped out. But the story doesn't end there. Sometime later, a client from another home, whom Chris was very close to, sadly died. He was sick for a while, and Chris was present for his final breaths in the hospital. He was wheelchair bound when he was alive, and later a client at the white dress home needed a wheelchair, temporarily while recovering from a slip and fall accident. They brought the wheelchair that used to belong to Kieran, and right away Barry began fixating on it. When it was no longer in use, Barry would take it for his own enjoyment. Staff took note of this and couldn't explain why he loved it so much. He would take it outside to a small hill, push it down the hill empty, and then return it to the top and do it over and over again. Barry is non-verbal, in that he can't speak with spoken language, but he does understand speech and communicates using gestures. One useful gesture has him select staff's left or right hand in a sort of this or that conversation. For example, he could hold out my hand and say, "Barry, do you want tacos for dinner tonight?" and identify it as left-hand option. Or do you want burgers for dinner tonight? Right hand. And then he would choose. He also had a tic where he would hold his palm up to his face very close and sort of mumble into it. This is actually what Chris thought he saw when White Dress was under the tree. He thought Barry was there doing that. This is important because Barry would often do this gesture when he played with the wheelchair. Staff got curious and thought they might be able to determine who Barry was speaking to and playing within the wheelchair. They posed a sequence of this and that questions with fake names. Barry, who's in the wheelchair? Is it Michael or Emily? No response. Is it James or Samuel? No response. Is it Stephanie or Teresa? No response. They did this a few times before dropping in the real name casually. Is it Kieran or Jen? Right away he selected the correct hand. Everyone present was shocked. According to Chris, he was the only real link between Kieran and this house. Barry and Kieran didn't know each other, and he didn't believe anyone talked of the previous owner of the wheelchair, and he can't explain how Barry knew his name. This story doesn't end there, however. For reasons unknown to me, Chris took this wheelchair home for a while. Maybe it was a keepsake. He took it home with him, and weird things began happening around his house. Chris and John, like I said, are brothers. They live in a big house and rent it out with their girlfriends, as well as 2 others. One day everyone was out, except for John and Chris's girlfriend. Both of them claimed the door to Chris's bedroom slammed much too loudly and hard to be explained by wind, especially since no windows in his bedroom were open. This happened a few times while the wheelchair was there, which is more interesting when you know that Kieran would often get Chris's attention by slamming doors. John said other strange things had happened once the wheelchair arrived too, but I'm a bit confounded on details. I do know he claimed to have once heard someone calling his name, but no one was home but him. As I said, both Chris and John remain skeptics. They agree these events are all strange, but ultimately are not convinced. I too am what I call a hopeful skeptic. I would love for any of the paranormal subjects in the world to be verified, but I guess I need to see it myself to believe it. John summarized his feelings well by saying, "I'm not saying it was a ghost. I'm just saying weird things would happen while we had the wheelchair here, and they stopped when the wheelchair left." I asked about the current whereabouts of this wheelchair, but I forget what they said. Either they don't know, or it's somewhere else in the company, where Chris no longer visits. If I can get hold of it, I'd love to ask for more details. I'd like to know what you guys think about these stories. Specifically, I'm curious to know more about what John said are referred to as anchor points. The wheelchair was present when Kieran died. Apparently some believe that souls, which I do not believe in, can attach themselves to physical objects of importance from a person's life. This logic doesn't make sense to me. Even if I suspend my disbelief and believe in ghosts, what makes me believe these ghosts can attach themselves to objects? Is it the same logic that ghosts haunt certain areas, homes, vehicles, or rooms? I'm just dying to be convinced. And I always love hearing more stories and reading theories and learning about this topic. Finally, I'd like to mention that I spoke to John. He also has videos of the chair moving by itself on flat ground. It was deleted on his phone, but he hopes a co-worker still has it. He also clarified that he never really attributed these events to the chair until later when he heard staff speculate there was a cursed object, and he put it all together. Lastly, he added that another boy at the house was able to describe White Dress, and he often played with the wheelchair too. The details get kind of confusing because the White Dress stories and the wheelchair stories are separate, but he said it was all amplified once the chair arrived at the house. Finally, he told me of an incident where the wheelchair was rolling down hills and slamming the doors, And it was strange to him, because those were the things that Kieran loved to do the most while he was alive. My dad passed away when I was 11. Every summer we went to a little town which had a porcelain doll museum. I loved going there, hanging out with my dad, and had several dolls myself, but the one I loved the most was one that resembled an Indian girl with 2 braids. I kept it on a shelf that was facing my bed, pushed it to the corner, and I had it for 3 to 4 years. I didn't even touch it, I only admired it. Well, as I mentioned, my father died in December. Fast forward half a year later, it's June, summer holidays, and I'm laying on my bed with my laptop, chatting with my friends at midnight. Both my door and window were open, but it was quiet outside with no wind, and the doll suddenly fell to the floor. I was startled by the noise but confused since it didn't shatter. The shelf was 1.7 meters high, so I turned off the light, covered myself in a blanket, and went to sleep, hoping I could. The next morning the doll was still on the ground face down. I started to think how it could fall. It was protected from wind, although there was none, and a 40-centimeter empty space in front of it. I got up shaking and slowly approached it. I sat on the floor and picked it up. It was intact, except for one thing. The left braid was cut in half, not torn, cut. I quickly put it away and never touched it again, nor even took a look at it. I still don't really know what happened. I tried to think it was my dad comforting me, but as I grew older that didn't seem logical. Why would my dad, who loved me the most, try to hurt my favorite doll? When I was little, my dad told me that our house used to be owned by what he thought was a cult. We know nothing about this supposed cult, except that the leader owned several nice cars that were remained parked out front most of the time. All of the windows were boarded up, and each of the bedrooms had at least 2 bunks in them. I'm not sure if this cult is real or not, and my dad could have just told me that to scare me, but nevertheless, that got me thinking the house might be haunted. This could be chalked up to my brain interpreting meaningless noise into something with meaning. But I was little, and would often hear my name called, even though I was the only one home or awake at the time, which I thought was evidence of a ghost. Fast forward to 2013. I was in 8th grade, and I wanted to test whether my house was haunted or not, so I used my homemade Ouija board to try and communicate with the other side. I asked if anything was there, and the shot glass that served as the triangle thing that types what the message says moved to yes. I asked their name, and it moved to R and stopped, and I was left with the impression that its name was Rebecca. I asked if they were in the cult, and it didn't move. I knew I asked some more simple questions, and I forgot what exactly they were, but I was left with the impression that I was generally friendly, and I moved the shot glass to goodbye. More recently, one of my dogs has become terrified of 2 doorways in the house. One is on the ground floor and one is in the basement. The ground floor doorway connects the living room and the dining room, and the basement doorway connects a room with a fireplace to another room in the basement, where we put the dogs when no one's home. It's worth noting that the fireplace room is the room where I conducted my Ouija board experiment. The first time I noticed him being scared of a doorway was in the basement. At first I thought he was scared of the room we put him in when we leave, because he doesn't like getting locked up for several hours while my parents and I are at work and school, and I didn't think anything odd was happening. But when he became afraid of the upstairs doorway, which he had no reason to be afraid of. What do you mean by scared? I foresee you asking. I mean tail tucked between his legs. He was so scared he wouldn't even pass through the doorway. If you call his name a shaken box of treats, which he would usually come dashing out for, he still wouldn't come. The first time I noticed this behavior upstairs, I picked him up and walked close to the doorway. It was my intention to make him cross it, realizing nothing was there, but he tried to bite me, so I set him down. People say dogs see things that we can't. Could there be a ghost that hangs around these two doorways? Maybe. I don't know. But I do know he's scared specifically of that doorway, not the door. He exhibits the same behavior on both sides of the ground floor doorway. As for the basement doorway, he could just be scared of the room itself, but I've never seen him be scared of the doorway from the room where he gets locked up. The times I have seen him scared of the basement doorway were at night, which wouldn't make sense if he was scared of getting locked away, as we don't lock him up at night. While I've yet to experience his fear of the upstairs doorway, I have experienced his fear of the basement doorway. When I was little, there used to be a TV in the dog room where I would play GameCube. I usually played at night, and when it was time to go to bed, I would sometimes be overcome with fear as I passed through the doorway. I would imagine a disembodied hand reaching out the darkness and trying to grab me as I dashed to the stairs. Did I ever see that hand, or do I believe that hand was really there? Of course not. It must be my imagination. But that doorway gave me the creeps when I was little. Even now, while I don't imagine a hand coming out of the abyss trying to pull me into the room, my animal brain sometimes takes control for a split second and screams "run" as I'm going upstairs, before my adult brain chides myself for being such a child. I've also experienced sleep paralysis a number of times. As anyone who's had sleep paralysis will tell you, haunted house or not, sleep paralysis is one of the most terrifying experiences you'll ever have, even if it lasts less than 30 seconds. Two of these experiences stick out to me. I'll start with the first, less scary event. I had been having trouble getting to sleep the past few nights, so my brother gave me some sleep aid. I went to sleep almost immediately and slept for a few hours before walking and finding myself unable to move. This was my first episode of sleep paralysis, and simply not being able to move was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced. After I got over the initial shock, I looked around my room and saw dark figures standing in my closet, watching me. This went on for a few seconds before I regained my ability to move and it vanished. I stayed up the rest of the night, as I didn't even know that sleep paralysis was a thing, or that hallucinations often accompanied it. Now, when I have sleep paralysis, I'm incredibly scared during the episode, but immediately afterwards, the fear is gone, and I usually can't even remember what I saw the next day. Just that I had sleep paralysis, and I either had a hallucination, or I didn't. My second sleep paralysis story is unlike anything I've ever experienced before or since. I fell asleep and woke up in the middle of the night to find I couldn't move. This time, however, I heard something. Maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill here, but I never heard things in my sleep paralysis before or since. I heard what sounded like a baby giggle. Think of the cheesiest evil child giggling sound effect from a low-budget movie you've ever heard, and that's what I heard. And it only gets worse. Usually I sleep on my back, which just so happens to be the most optimal position for sleep paralysis. But that night, I was sleeping on my side, and I felt something breathing on my neck. Just like hearing things, I had never felt something during one of my episodes that wasn't actually there. On top of that, there was again a thing in my closet, but this time it came out, walked right up to me and crouched down, so we looked at each other in the eyes. Then I regained control of my body, and it disappeared. And that's all I have worth sharing. I've always been a skeptic of the paranormal, and though it's always interested me, I've never believed in it, even though my own experiences could be easily debunked. The Ouija board stuff could be idiomotor response. Animals behave irrationally trying to understand why they do things, and it's often fruitless. And my sleep paralysis experience could just be my imagination. I'm not sure you'll believe this is evidence of the paranormal or not, but I've always wanted to share some of my experience of the strange. I hope you appreciated my story. When I was 16, I found a yellow sheer fabric, I think it was tapestry, with outline of white fishes on it in my parents' attic. It was summer. My room tends to get hot, so I ended up using it as a blanket of sorts. My parents have no recollection of it or why it was in our home. I remember one night as I was trying to look for it, and it seemed like it had vanished. I didn't really think much of it. I thought maybe my mum misplaced it when she washed it. I guess a few months passed and I remembered and wondered what had happened to it. My dad, turns out, burnt it. He said that one night he went to check on me and my sister as we shared a room and slept in separate twin beds. He told me that when he looked at my bed, it seemed like no one was sleeping there. He got closer as he was worried, and I was there. He said the more he got closer, he noticed it looked like I was wrapped with pitch black darkness, which really freaked him out, because my bed was against two big windows and I purposely had really sheer curtains so that the moonlight and sun would brighten my room. But somehow, with the moonlight shining, I remained to look like darkness. My dad removed the blanket off me to make sure I wasn't passed out under it. He said he later looked at the blanket to see why the hell a sheer yellow blanket would do that. He said the white fishes didn't look like fishes at all. He described it as looking like the skeleton of fishes, with something inside the bellies trying to get out. That's when he decided to burn it. Honestly, I don't know what to think to this day. I never felt anything wrong with the blanket itself. I really think my dad was just being dad, as he's a man of faith, and around that time he was listening to a sermon of objects being able to retain spirits. Matthew 8:24-34 is what I remember him bringing up. I'm just wondering if anyone might have experienced anything like this. I'm not sure if the blanket was cursed, but whatever my dad thought, it was enough to burn the damn thing. Then again, my dad can be very extreme when it comes to things. I'd just like to know someone else's thoughts. I don't know what's been happening, but everything has been weird in our home lately. My cousin said it was probably a ghost joking, but it got me thinking. Everything in our refrigerator has been expiring and is full of mold. Nothing was supposed to expire until the end of next year, and yes, our refrigerator temperature is fine. It's 36 Fahrenheit. The dishwasher was full of maggots as well, which almost caused me to vomit. I've been hearing soft footsteps lately in the living room when I'm home alone. The walls are soundproof as well, so it can't be my neighbors. And I have 2 cats, but they're always in my bedroom. Even my cats, for God's sakes, have been hissing and running away from the pantry when I open it. I removed all the bags and food, which caused them to get even more scared. This all started about 2 weeks ago when my mother brought antique dolls at the thrift store, which, yes, I know is a stretch to even think they're haunted, and it might be a coincidence, but I'm not taking any chances. This might all have been something to do with those dolls. I don't really understand why this is happening now. I'm very uncomfortable in my own home. We can't move out. We can't afford anything like that at the moment. I just want to know what is going on. I had missed the last bus home from a friend's house, so I walked home one night. It wasn't too far, and I was texting my boyfriend so that he knew I was safe. About 20 minutes into my walk, I heard what sounded like a chain-link fence being shaken rather hard. I turned around to see no one. Being late, I knew it could have been coming from a neighboring street, so I brushed it off and kept walking. Not even 5 minutes later, I felt something like small pebbles hitting me in the back. I turned around, and again there was no one there. A month later, I had gone home sick from work one night. It was around 10 p.m, and I was lying on my bed watching YouTube videos when I felt a cat jump up. Suddenly I remembered that both our cats had been let out. Seeing as we lived on a main street above a dairy that had a dog, we would wait for the dairy to close at 9 p.m. and the owners to leave before letting the cats out, simply so they didn't have to deal with heavy traffic, seeing as we had moved from a very quiet suburb. It meant they wouldn't get spooked and freeze in the middle of the road, especially seeing as we knew that the street was prone to traffic accidents. Sure enough, there was no cat on the bed, even though I could still feel one walking across the mattress. I later told my boyfriend, who shrugged it off. And later that night, I went to the bathroom on top of the cistern, and there was a small candelabra and the air freshener. Now, they had both sat on top of it for months at this stage without any issue. However, as I went to flush, I watched the air freshener bottle slide across the cistern and balance precariously with the majority of the bottle hanging over the end, and then go crashing to the ground. I replaced it, walked out of the bathroom, and stood in the hallway swearing to myself. My boyfriend had just gone to bed, so I let him have room to sleep. I sat at the computer, and after maybe an hour, my backpack, which had sat in the same place for a few weeks, again, without any problem, and which had not been touched for or since, fell over and spilled its contents across the floor. The odd thing about this is that it fell opposite to the angle that it should have been leaning. Around 3:30, my boyfriend went to the bathroom. I heard the distinct thud and then him swearing, as I had done previously. He came back into the bedroom, ashen face, and he said, "I believe you now." Next morning I was preparing to leave. I heard a loud exhale from over my shoulder. I was alone, and for once I didn't have music playing. That night I had finished work and done grocery shopping, and it wasn't until I was letting myself into the house that I realized I had forgotten to buy a light bulb for the hallway. As I went to go around the corner to the kitchen, I kicked something rather solid but soft. I quickly dumped the bags and flicked on the kitchen light to find out which cat I had kicked to apologize. And I saw no cat, but heard a meow from my bedroom. As I turned around, I see both cats come out of it. Now, before you jump to conclusions, after nearly a year of only going outside at night, the cats have become rather plump and lazy. If either of them had run away from me, I would have heard their little feet scamper down the hall. They came and rubbed against me, and then meowed to be let outside, which is obviously not behavior if you've just been stepped on. So I did that, put the groceries away, then went to tell my head tenant what had happened over the last 24 hours or so. I've been haunted before, and I knew that that was a lot of activity for something that had just started. Early hours of the next morning, I got up to use the loo, and when I went back to the bedroom, my boyfriend was freaking out. He said he thought I was still in bed, as he could feel someone laying next to him. He also had very bad dreams that night, but couldn't remember them well enough in the morning to tell me. The next day, I was getting ready for work. We had a staircase from the front door to the actual livable part of the flat. I knew that the same flatmate was asleep, as she'd only been out late the night before. My boyfriend was at work, and we were the other two flatmates. I suddenly heard 3 sharp raps on the wall. I knew it came from the inside stairwell. The only problem was that for anyone to reach that part of the wall, they would either have to not be touching the floor somehow, or at least be 7 feet tall. This woke up the head tenant, who came to ask me what the hell I was doing, as the sound had awoken her. I told her where the sound had come from. She apologized, and then said that she was going to make some warding sigils for the house, since she was a practicing Wiccan. And no, it wasn't something that she had summoned during the ritual, as she hadn't done anything for about a month at that point. About a week later, I was playing with one of the cats in the hallway, when I heard something scrape across the bathroom floor. Even the cat seemed freaked out by the noise. He put his hackles up and started hissing and spitting and backing away from the room. I was the only person awake in the house at that point, and being late at night, the dairy downstairs had long since closed. Early the next morning, I was putting my boots on when something rather violently shook my chair. I was glad I was about to leave for work, and again, a gap of a few days, and I'm getting ready for work. I see a little orange and white paw poke out from under the chair. Thinking it was one of my boys asking for attention, I reach down to pat them, but there's nothing there. I look around the flat. One cat is asleep on the bed. The other I hear meowing from the hallway. The cats are fat, and as I've mentioned previously, could not move that fast. A few days later, it's 3:05 a.m. I go to the toilet, go to the kitchen and feed the cats, wash my hands, and as I'm going back to my room, the bathroom tap starts running. I was the only person to awake, and I hadn't been in the bathroom. It was quickly getting over 3 a.m. in that house at that point, and about a week later it's mid-afternoon, and I feel something clawing at the computer chair. Both of the cats are asleep in different parts of the bedroom. A few weeks managed to pass with no noticeable activity, but then one day I had decided to do some baking and clean the communal areas of the house. I had put the mop head on the floor in the laundry because I had been using the tub for something, and since people were asleep, I didn't want to knock it and make lots of noise. I was in the kitchen doing dishes and dancing around, when suddenly I hear a clanging noise from the laundry room. I went to see if the cats had knocked something over, and found the mop head in the sink. I still can't figure out how something gets from the floor to not the floor. 2 days later, I'm up late, as I have work the next day. I was watching videos and heard a noise in the background. I thought originally it was part of the video, but when the video ended, it could still be heard. It was the sound of running water at 4:15. I was the only person awake again, and no one had been up for over an hour. I could always hear people when they moved around the house, as all of the doors creaked. I went to the hallway and the sound got louder. I followed the noise. The cold tap in the bathroom was running as full as before. At this point, it hadn't been 2 months since the activity started. I'm terrified to leave my room between 3 and 4 a.m. and any time I do, my stomach ties itself in knots. I get clammy, start sweating and feel like I'm about to have a full-blown panic attack. I feel like I need to be physically ill and have trouble breathing properly. But the moment it hits 4 a.m., the feeling stops. By this stage, I realize I had stopped seeing my guide. I have a black cat that I only ever see half of at a time, either the front, as it watches me around the corner, or the back, as it walks around one. I used to see it roughly once a week, but I haven't seen it for about a month at this point. A week or so later, I had planned to take my new camera to work with me, to test it out on my walk home. I would always walk home after a closing shift, as it was faster than waiting for the next bus. I had told one of the other girls my plan, except that I had managed to forget to pack said camera. She freaked out when I told her I walk home alone after 11 p.m, but I never had any problems. Seeing as I had left my uniform on for the walk, people left me alone on the rare occasion that I saw anyone. Not that I did anything overly exciting for a job, as I worked at a supermarket. So I get to the top of the hill, go to the lookout, and go to take photos on my phone of the lights on the other side of the harbour, just because I love the view. The first photo was fine. The second photo had a strange blue fog across it, and the final photo was also fine. I went into the gallery to check the photos, and the blue fog was a face right in front of my lens. Important detail, I was standing on a park bench and holding my phone above my head to where I could just see the screen, making this head roughly 7 feet off the ground. You best believe it when I got out of there really fast, but until I deleted the original copy off my phone, I was having massive issues. The battery drained within a day even if I wasn't using it. It took all night for it to charge, and it still wouldn't be full in morning. It kept randomly turning itself on and off, and the moment I deleted that picture, the issues ceased. About a month later, through strange noises and things moving in the house, this had become a nearly daily occurrence. I was at my friend's place this one time, and we were having a few drinks. Everyone else was around the table, but I had gotten up to refill my drink. I was roughly 2 meters away from everyone when I felt something tugging the back of my jersey. So now things were happening outside my house as well. A few months later, my wicker flatmate had tried warding runes, saging and rituals to cleanse the house, as all flatmates are noticing strange things happening at this stage. I had gone to my sister's house for her daughter's first birthday, and I had spoken to her previously about what had been going on. But even though she is a very skilled medium, something was blocking her from seeing what was causing the issues. Thankfully, our uncle, who was even more skilled, was there. I told him about what had been going on and showed him the picture, as I had still access to it thanks to Messenger. At the same time, my sister was having issues in her place to do with our Nan's old man room, and her elder daughter no longer wanting to sleep in her room at night because of something watching her from it. Our uncle had told her that it was just a curious relative, possibly someone who had given Nana the robe. But as soon as he saw the photo, his exact words to me were, "You need to get rid of it as quick as possible. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I don't want you to lose faith in yourself in being able to banish it. But you need to be stronger than you have ever been to do this." This scared me more than I had thought possible, because he didn't want to tell me what it was, or rather than who they were. But believe you me, between my flatmate and I, we had done everything we could to cleanse the house to rid ourselves of this thing. Finally, a month later, after plenty more activity in the house, hearing my name whispered in my ear at work, and hearing a child's laughter when I was alone, having electronics stop working on me, including tills and EFT POS machines at work, I somehow got rid of it. I moved house not long after. It was like a breath of fresh air. I wonder how long it would take for something else to attach itself to me. It seems now to be a running theme in my life. I was going to my sister's graduation in Binghamton University, and my family rented out a well-priced Airbnb for 2 nights. The only one that had 5 bedrooms, because extended Chinese family. It was a Victorian-era house, completely decked out with Victorian American aesthetics, trinkets, paintings of serious children, photos of even more serious children, ornate floral wallpaper and dolls. Many dolls. We were picking up bedrooms, and no one in my family wanted the room with the creepy dolls. I'm not superstitious, and I didn't see the room, and I didn't understand the gravity of the situation. So I was like, sure, I'll take the room with the dolls. You see where this is going. As midnight approached, I got tired, even after being energized by a tiny bite of baklava and an espresso. So I was the first to go to bed. I went into the room and saw the dolls. They were locked inside a glass case, all facing the bed. Don't be silly, I thought. You're a brave trans girl, and they're probably more afraid of you than you are of them, because you're something they've likely never encountered before. Silly thoughts. I decided to take out my black ebony-handled Opinel pocket knife and slept with it at the nightstand, so I would have some protection. I watched YouTube for a while, turned off the lamp, and went under the covers. I felt the dolls staring, but my rational side told me it was all in my head. By 3 a.m., I was half conscious, slipping in and out of pure unconsciousness. While I was in a dreamlike state, I was aware of everything going on around me. The dolls staring. Were they next to me? I was afraid to open my eyes. I blinked. And I thought, it's okay, I have protection. I didn't dare look at the ebony-handled knife on the nightstand. I was afraid I'd see a doll next to me. Then I remembered statistically armed victims of assault tend to have their weapons taken away and used against them. And I thought, my gosh, I'm gonna get stabbed. Then I heard vividly a playful, childlike voice. It would be my heart's desire. I immediately became alert, like R2-D2 rebooting after being in low power mode. Adrenaline rushed through me. I heard a ringing in my ear as my awareness went from 0 to 60 in a split second. I stayed like that until the sun started to rise at around 5 a.m. That was when I fell asleep. When I woke up, I dreaded having to sleep there again for yet another night. The next night I thought, you know what? Violence begets violence. So I slept with my pocket knife in my bag instead. And I fell asleep and slept through the night. We were in my daughter's room going through the whole bedtime routine. My wife sat on the bed brushing my daughter's hair to put it in a braid, while I stood around waiting to tuck her in and say goodnight. While waiting, I commented on a collectible 2010 holiday Barbie doll, still boxed, that was given to my daughter by our neighbor. I was curious to know if she had taken it out of the box, and my wife replied that yes, she did because dolls are meant to be played with. To that comment, I mentioned to my daughter that both her mother and I had collectible dolls tucked away in our closet, each of them still in boxes and never opened. These were a Bruce Lee action figure and a Jesse the Governor Ventura doll, and a 95th anniversary collectible Raggedy Ann doll. As I said this, my wife quickly corrected me and said no, that it's a Cabbage Patch doll that she owned, and that one of them would tan well. Having just reorganized my closet one day before, I was pretty sure it was a Raggedy Ann doll, but my wife swore up and down that she never owned such a thing. Curiosity got the best of me, and so I pulled the box out of the closet and brought it back to the room to show her. As I held it up, my wife stopped brushing my daughter's hair and slowly shook her head, and, trying not to scare my daughter, mouthed the words, "It's not mine. I've never seen it before," with a very serious look in her eyes. My wife has an incredibly sharp mind and a memory that sometimes terrifies me, so I know she wasn't trying to pull my leg. I asked if it might have been given to her by her sister, but a quick phone call confirmed that her sister had not. She once did, however, give her a collectible Mary Poppins doll, which both of them remembered. So here we are now in our home, a doll for which we have no idea where it came from. I thought I had chills already running down my spine at that point, until I realized the doll was coincidentally the same as Annabelle, the haunted doll, which spawned horror movies and are now kept in the Ed and Lorraine Warren Occult Museum. It's probably nothing, but seriously, we freaked out. My wife does have a Cabbage Patch Kid tucked away in another closet, but it's not this one. I live in Adelaide, South Australia. I moved to the city from a small country town with my partner, Mrs. Brajicar, roughly 10 years ago now. We moved into a small, 2-story townhouse with another friend. It was a really nice place, clearly an older building, but the interior had been modernized. Everything started off okay. Our friend took the master bedroom, which came with a walk-in wardrobe, while we took the room next door. Both bedrooms and a bathroom were up on the second floor. Under the stairs was a small broom cupboard. We didn't use it much at first, because for some reason it was extremely cold in there. Nothing could heat it up, not even a heater. We assumed there must be a hole leading to the outside somewhere, and left it at that. It was about a month into living there when the first weird thing happened. I was home alone sitting downstairs with the TV on quietly while I read a book, and I heard my name. I looked at the TV thinking that someone on there must also be named what my name is. But no, nobody on that episode of Scrubs was called that. Out of sheer curiosity, I turned the TV off and listened intently. Nothing. So I figured it must have been my imagination. And then I went to turn the TV back on. As I pressed the power button, I heard my name again. The voice was definitely coming from upstairs. I believed since I was a kid, due to other experiences. But this really got my hairs on end. I called Mrs. B and asked when she would be home. Not until tomorrow. I'm staying at my mum's tonight. Our other housemate was also away. I turned the TV back on, raised the volume and found some blankets in the cold cupboard, and slept downstairs that night. The name calling continued on and off for a few months, but our other housemate never heard it. In fact, she didn't believe in anything paranormal and thought I was making it up. Mrs. B did, and agreed there was something else in that house. Not long after, our housemate moved out, and we took over the master bedroom. A few days later, a handyman came to install a TV antenna plug on the wall downstairs. To get the wires through the wall, he had to get into the crawl space upstairs. It was around lunchtime, and we had an awesome takeaway place just round the corner. I let the guy know I was ducking out for 10 minutes or so to grab food, and left him in the crawl space. When I got back, I found him downstairs confused. "Did you come back 5 minutes ago and call my name?" he asked. No, I said. And he explained that he heard the door open and close, and then his name was called. He chalked it up to my next door neighbor, but I knew that wasn't it. The real terror began about a week after that. I came home from work at about 8 p.m. when Mrs. B was working late and couldn't be home until midnight. But when I walked into the back door, I distinctly heard her call my name from upstairs. I called back that I didn't think she'd be home yet and made my way up. Opening the bedroom door, I instantly realized that it was not Mrs. B who called me. A wave of hate burst from that room and hit me like a ton of bricks. Never before and never again have I felt a presence like that. Whatever the hell it was, it didn't like me at all. I quickly got changed and took a look around the room. The walk-in wardrobe had a white curtain for a door, and I closed it every morning when I left the house. It was wide open now. I raced back downstairs, left the house, and went to the pub. I met Mrs. B at home when she finished, and told her what happened. She didn't believe me at first, but when she saw how terrified I was of our room, she realized I wasn't lying. The hate in the room was gone, but I could still feel something. We went to bed, and I closed the curtain, and I swear I could feel eyes on me. I slept on the side of the bed furthest away from it, and in the morning the curtain was open. We lived in that house for a few more months, and I never experienced this hate in that same sensation again, until our final day in the house. But there was still something there, something that didn't want me. I put all my clothes in the spare room, so I wouldn't have to go into the walk-in wardrobe, because that's where, whatever it was, felt strongest to me. It was also the location of the crawl space hatch. Friends have heard the voices calling out sometimes, but no one else felt the presence like I did. The day we moved out, I was the last one there. As I was checking over all the rooms and locks for the last time, I heard my name. I shivered but ignored it this time and kept doing what I had to do. I checked the last lock, and walked out of the house for the last time. I got into my car, looked up at the master bedroom window, and I swear without a doubt, there was a woman up there glaring at me. That feeling of pure hatred hit me for the last time, and I floored it out of that street and never looked back. Mrs. B to this day doesn't believe me about that because she didn't see it. I can appreciate the need of seeing to believe, but I know what I saw, and I hope I never see it again. I used to own many dolls and stuffed animals, as most 7-year-olds would. I believed in magic and had a huge fantasy. I even believed my dolls could move and do stuff when I wasn't watching, like in Toy Story. I always wanted to see my dolls move, but unfortunately never saw it. One day, my mother gave me a bowl of mashed potatoes and a glass of water. I went upstairs to my room and decided to have a nice meal with my dolls. I got some plastic bowls and spoons and put mashed potatoes in their bowls. I was hoping they would actually eat it. I had this one old-fashioned doll my grandma gave me, called Mary. I put the spoonful of mashed potatoes in her mouth and waited for her to eat it. Of course, nothing happened. After a few minutes, I wanted to go to the toilet, and before I left, I looked at my dolls and said, "When I get back, I want all the bowls to be empty," in a strict tone. So I did my thing, went back upstairs since we only had one toilet which was downstairs, and when I got back to the seat, the bowls were unfortunately still full, which meant the dolls hadn't eaten a thing. But when I looked at Mary's bowl, it was empty. I was kind of shocked. I looked at Mary and her mouth was dirty, as if she had been eating it in a messy way. I rushed downstairs to my sister and mother and asked them if they had fed the doll, because the bowl was empty. They both said no and swore on their lives. "Maybe your mashed potatoes fed it to the doll," one of them said. But since I believed in magic, I was just happy about it. This wasn't the last time I saw Mary acting unusual. One time I put her on my bed before I went on vacation to Morocco, and after 6 weeks, when I arrived back to the Netherlands, I saw that Mary wasn't sitting on my bed anymore. Instead, she was sitting on my trash can and her body faced the wall, but her head was turned 90 degrees so that her head was facing me. My mother said, "You must have put her there before we left and you just forgot." That was weird. It wasn't the last time she did anything unusual. In 6th grade, I went camping with my class and took Mary with me. We made a huge fire where we were eating marshmallows. I took my doll out the bag and threw her in the fire. Everyone was confused, so I explained the paranormal experiences I had with Mary. And even though people didn't believe me and thought I was crazy, I was glad to be rid of her, and I'm glad I haven't seen her since that day. This story takes place when I lived on my old property. I was a little boy, maybe 8 or 9. You see, the cul-de-sac I lived in was a fairly nice neighborhood, nothing crazy. My room was across from my parents', just down a long hall and next to my sister's room. My brother and I shared rooms and a bunk bed. Everything was fine until my sister reached her teen angst phase. Then came the doll. It was a creepy-looking porcelain doll with a black tutu and had a punk rock kind of motif, and she loved it. She got it from her godmother, a woman we no longer speak to. My brother and my mum and I never liked the thing because it gave us the creeps, but hey, it was her doll. However, slowly but surely we began to see a change in her. She was beginning to become more reclusive and angry with my mother for no reason at all, and even cut herself in front of me once. Weird, yes, but nothing quite supernatural. Then she began to sleepwalk. At first we thought it was normal, maybe just stress from being a teenage girl, I don't know. But she started to creep me out. And because of this, I began to lock the door at night after my brother fell asleep. And on one of these nights, I heard her get up from her bed and slowly walk. I was in my top bunk, mind you, watching under the door when I saw her shadow. See, as my room is across from my parents', I couldn't tell if she was standing there in front of my room or my parents', but it was still very creepy, and she stood there for an unnatural amount of time. On the last occasion, we all awoke one morning to a knife under my parents' bedroom door, and this just made them flip out. They weren't scared, they were more concerned about my sister being nuts and homicidal, since she'd been acting so strangely. Things went on for a little bit, until one day the doll disappeared and my sister came out furious, huffing and puffing, but no one in the house seemed to have an inkling about its disappearance. And so, life went on, and I never knew what happened to it, until I asked my dad about it years later, and he enlightened me. It turns out that my godmother was heavily into black magic and Santeria, and had a deep hate for my mother over some petty squabble they had before my father and mother were married, and held a deep resentment for her. I guess firstborn females of the family is important in Santeria, and so when she saw an opportunity, she gave my sister that horrible doll we hated. But what actually happened to the doll was the funniest part. My mum is super religious, and I guess at some point she had soaked the doll in holy water and left it in the trash for the garbage man to take out to the dump the next day. Another funny thing, my sister never sleepwalked again. I grew up in a haunted house. It was a pretty old house. It still had horsehair insulation, that velvet damask wallpaper, dirt floor basement, crystal doorknobs, cubby holes that you would crawl from one room to another, and a really nice clawfoot tub, along with an awesome wood stove. It was big enough that it had a front and back staircase. The front staircase was really ornate, but the back staircase was basically just plywood. Okay, now that you have a visual, on with my family's experiences. When I was very young, I became more aware of the noises and actions, and my parents would tell me it was all in my head. The older I got, the more I began to doubt that. Starting with the everyday and night experiences, like the footsteps up and down every night, mostly heard on the creaky back staircase. Low knocks on the walls, taps on the windows, items moved or crashed on the floor, and the scariest was gentle scratching noises under my bed and feeling someone sit on my bed. I began wrapping my blankets over my head and blocking my ears with my fingers. Around 10, it became more intense, doors opening and closing with enough force that it was definitely not a draft. The silverware drawer was completely pulled out and smashed to the floor when everyone was in the living room, feeling not so much a tug on my hair, but like someone was lifting up strands. At this point, my little brother of 6 and me at 10 had been sharing a bedroom. All the rooms were huge. My dad built me my very own room that was previously attic space, but on the same floor. It was huge, and was more like a living room with a bedroom around the corner. Every few days, I would be in bed, and hear my door creak open. Someone walk over to my bed and sit down. It was terrifying. I still used to go blankets over my head and fingers in my ears. The knocking on the walls started to become more louder and fast. The scratching under my bed seemed to be a bit more violent. My parents still dismissed our fears. When I was around 11 or 12, it became even more intense. I had to babysit my little brother almost every day during the week. This was back in the day when TVs had knobs to change the channel. We would be in the living room watching TV, and the knobs would visually turn by themselves. Sometimes only a few channels over, and other times fast through a bunch. Like my parents, I downplayed it to my little brother, and just took him outside to play pickle or kick the can with the neighborhood kids. They had already told me the rumors about the house and would hardly ever come over. The most notable experience was walking down the back stairs. A strand of my hair was tugged hard, and I heard distinct breathing in my ear. I grabbed my brother and went across the street and waited in the pouring rain for my parents to get home. Ironically, where we waited was an entrance to an old cemetery, but I don't believe it was related to the haunting. The older I got, the more aggressive it got. TV knobs still being turned, curtains moving, steps up the stairs turning into stomps. The weirdest to me was the phone cord. It was one of those extremely long cords. The whole family was in the kitchen, and it started spinning. Not like a regular spin, but diagonally, like a lasso, about 5 feet off the wall. My parents downplayed that too, but by then, it didn't matter. I started to become desensitized. Going into 5th grade, I acquired a new best friend. She would come over, and it turns out we were both really into the supernatural. Watcher in the Woods with Betty Davis was our favorite movie. I ended up telling her about the house, and we came up with a brilliant plan. To buy one of those Hasbro Ouija boards, candles lit and everything. Never even thinking it would work, and I don't remember if I actually did get it to work. But one day while babysitting, I had my innocent little brother play with me. The board immediately worked. My brother was freaking out, but I kept on going. I don't exactly remember the exact questions, but some of the answers were, "Kill John, my little brother." My addiction with all things horror, movies and books and such, led me to believe I had to burn the board. I took it out to the side yard and tried to burn it, but it just scorched a little bit. My father asked why there was a huge pile of burnt leaves and sticks, and I told him why, and he got really serious. He dug the board out of the sticks and leaves and tried to burn it himself on the wood stove. It still just scorched, but more charcoal-like, so he threw it in the trash. After that, things didn't get much worse, but different. I had a huge double closet filled with metal hangers. The sound of them clanking against each other, like a hand sweeping over them, became a new scare. I reverted to my usual finger in ears and blanket overhead technique. But then I started getting pissed. I was so sick of being scared. I started yelling at whatever it was to leave us alone whenever it happened, and yelled that I wasn't afraid anymore, telling it to piss off. I had a game most people won't remember called Boggle. It was a cube of letters, and you shook it up and tried to find as many words as possible. One day I sat it in my living room and arranged the letters to say "go away" before bed. I woke up to the words being scrambled to say hump. Gross, I know. Everything ramped up. Louder knocks, heavier sitting on my bed, and more frequent visits into my room. By then I didn't care. I knew it sounds weird, but I started calling it out before I went to bed, and to wake me up at certain times, and it actually did with more gentle knocks by my bed. When something visual happened, I would tell it to cut it out. It didn't really listen that much, but it did occasionally. At the end of that experience, by the time I started fighting back, we moved. A few years later, my parents admitted it was haunted, and described some of their experiences too. I'm still drawn to that house, and I'm dying to walk through it again to see if it remembers me. Weird, I know. I've researched the house and owners and events related to it. The rumor was there was an older woman that died there and had an Irish wake. It was held in the house and lasted a week. I've desperately searched for the previous owners' names but found nothing. One notable thing is that the house has changed hands quite a few times since then. A few months ago I brought it up to my mum, and she told me the previous owners were a woman and her son that was a well-known judge. Their last name was Moriarty. Also, she told me how the day after the house was sold, the woman's daughter ripped the kitchen phone off the wall and screamed at my mother that now we couldn't use it to make long-distance calls. It didn't take long to find info on the son. He was a really well-known judge. The most messed up thing I learned from his obituary: he took a sabbatical to travel the world to visit sites that people have claimed to have seen the Virgin Mary. Why that is important, out of everything that happened, see the image of the classic depiction of the Virgin Mary in my little brother's bedroom window was the most predominant memory. I wasn't scared, but more curious, and then it faded. What are the chances? I'm also agnostic, but for some reason have always felt a deep representation when I need someone to guide me, so I recite Hail Mary. It's been quite therapeutic sharing this. There are many more silly stories about what happened when I was young, but at the present time, I've been seeing moving shadows out of the corner of my eyes every once in a while, as well as orbs. Perhaps one day, I'll be able to revisit my old place and see if the spooks are still about. When I was between the ages of 7 and 10, I lived in a house in a small town in Missouri. Nothing was abnormal about the house. I mean, normal house settling noises which would cause me to have nightmares frequently, until this incident that I will begin diving into. The only weird thing that ever happened was our keys going missing. When you walk in the door, there was a giant metal wood stove that we put our keys on. They went missing for weeks. We destroyed the house looking for them, and one day they just reappeared and nobody knew where they came from. Anyway, there was a doll back when I was younger called an Amazing Grace doll. She had holes in her ears so she could hear you and would turn her head where the noise came from and would say, "Mama." Well, I loved this doll. I explicitly remember cleaning my room and propping Grace against the wall so she was sitting up. I lay down on my bed to read when I heard the clicking she would make when her head turned. So I looked up and stared at her and got the normal "Mama" she would say after she heard something. So I tossed my book down and picked her up to make sure she was turned off. She was. I flipped her switch and then flipped it back to off, thinking that it was a normal malfunction. I set her back in a spot and plopped down to continue reading. When I started, she said "Mama" again. So I went and took all her batteries out. I was over it at this point, so I just tossed her on the ground and went back to my spot. She started clicking quicker, and her head was moving back and forth, and she just kept repeating "Mama." I took off. I ran to get my dad, and he saw it and decided that we would burn the little doll. We did, but nothing happened again to my recollection, but my nightmares got worse. And this was when I was still religious, so I would put all my stuffed animals around me in a circle to protect me. I had a turquoise dream catcher and would pray every night for the nightmare to go away. They didn't until we moved. They weren't every day, but definitely several times a week. I was born in 1984 and lived in the same house until the age of 18. My parents had lived there beforehand with my sister, who was 18 months older than me. My mum would always complain to my dad about cold spots in the house and the feeling of being watched. He just used to pass this off as her being alone and spooking herself whilst he was working. My uncle, who was in the army, came to live with them for some time before either my sister and I were born. He was younger and used to go on nights out. My mum and dad used to hear children playing out on the streets regularly in the early hours, which they thought was strange, but couldn't see anyone when they looked out. The occasion that convinced my dad about the house was when one night they were in bed and my uncle was out. They woke up to tapping on their bedroom door. They thought it was my uncle, so said to come in, but he didn't, and the tapping got louder, to the point my dad got out of the bed and with a bat went to the door to open it. To nothing. This was all before my sister and my experiences started, and similar things kept happening. After we were born, they didn't stop. Another family member was sleeping in my sister's room on a pull-out bed, and woke to my sister sitting upright in bed, talking with no one. When she asked who she was talking to, she said the little girl that was sat on the end of the bed. Needless to say, that family member was spooked. I myself had had a few things, like bangs, footsteps, and 2 incidences stick out in my mind. One morning, I was sat at the dining table eating breakfast with my mum, and we heard my sister walk out of her room and start to come down the stairs. We could see the lower stairs from where we were sat, and they had a distinct sound, as stairs do. My mum said, "Here she comes," and we watched the stairs as each step was being walked on, but no one was there. We went upstairs wondering what it was, just to find my sister asleep in bed. This next story is more unbelievable. To this day I've questioned my mum and sister as to if we actually saw this. My sister was 18. I was 17 at the time. My sister had gotten pregnant young, so we had her baby in the house now too. The baby was asleep in the cot upstairs in my sister's room, and was too young to roll/crawl/climb, like a few weeks old. We were sat at a dining table talking when we all heard and felt a massive bang. We all panicked and sprinted up the stairs and entered the room to find a washing maiden had fallen out into the cot, and my niece was fast asleep in the floor under where the maiden was resting in her cot. We were so puzzled, and none of us knew how that happened. After these events, we told people, and we were one day approached by a local historian who was writing a book and wanted to share our experiences in it. He also found out that our street was on a site of an old orphanage. Needless to say, he wrote the book, and we're in it, along with other ghost sightings in the area. Fast forward a few years, my parents had moved, and I'm living on my own, working in a job, and a new girl starts. Australian. Her family had just moved to the area. We were talking one day, and she started talking about ghosts. She tells me she has 2 dogs that won't come into her bedroom as they whine and act scared, and tells me her house is haunted. I say, "Oh, my house was too," and then she tells me that her house had been written about and was in a ghost book. Turns out she had moved into my old house all the way from Australia, and her room was my old sister's room. I can't tell you how much of that is too perfect for a coincidence. All of this is true and quite creepy. About 6 years ago, I lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone. My grandmother lived a few miles away from us in the middle of the woods. I used to love her house, but looking back, that house was pure horror. They had 100 acres of woods and not a house in sight. There was an old abandoned barn they used for storage for tools, but the rest of the property was unused. I was a kid, 1st, 2nd grade, and every time I visited I was asleep in a spare bedroom, aka the kids' room. The kids' room had a glass case mounted on the wall with at least 50 dolls all aligned looking straight forward. My great-grandmother collected vintage dolls from every state, and I was always petrified of that room, but didn't have much of a choice. One night, me and my sister are sleeping in the room. sharing the same bed when I wake up. The room is completely black, except for the dim hallway light. I remember seeing one of the doors of the case open, and one of the dolls started moving. Another time I was in the kids' room alone. I couldn't sleep because of what I saw last time, and that's when I noticed one of the dolls was out of place. Its head was facing the door, and this was odd because they were all mounted to the case and couldn't move. The doll's head began to slowly turn and look at me. I was off center to the left, so there's no way it wasn't paranormal. I sat there sweating bullets under my blanket, too afraid to yell for my grandma, and I eventually passed out. And when I woke up, the dolls were facing forward again. They have moved out the house since, and I think the dolls are in storage, but they still own part of their land and use it for camping. I am a collector of vintage and antique items, including mid-century fashion dolls. I usually purchase them from thrift stores, estate sales, or very occasionally on Craigslist. Recently I purchased a group of 1960s Barbie dolls that were a real bargain. I know the woman had a great knowledge of vintage dolls since she used to sell them on eBay, so she knew what they were worth. Still, I didn't question why she was selling them at such a low price. I was delighted with said purchase and couldn't wait to fix them up for my collection. A few days later, my bedroom suddenly became infested with flies. It was absolutely insane how many of these dirty little beasts filled my room. They seemed bent on driving me mad, as they were constantly buzzing in my face or landing on or over me. Some folks say that flies are a bad omen that signify the coming of bad times. These flies were of plague-like proportions, and were also a true enigma of why they arrived when they did. Around the time, I became very ill with flu-like symptoms. The weirdest part of this illness was a strange feeling like my brain was burning. I also experienced severe headaches that included crazy brain fog that felt like torture. It's hard to articulate exactly what the feeling was, but I've never experienced such an odd feeling in my head. It was so intense that ending my life crossed my mind. One last oddity to add to the pile. Usually I'm a very vivid dreamer with dreams that always have the same basic elements. After the purchase, my dreams have become dark and muddled. When I wake up I feel exhausted as if I haven't slept. So why did I equate these mysterious happenings with the recent purchase of the dolls? I know it's not entirely logical, but it's just a strong feeling I have. What should I do? Could an inanimate object be cursed or bring bad luck? Maybe that's why she sold them for so cheap. I just want to add that I do not practice the occult nor believe in ghosts. The reason being is that after my father passed away quite recently, I saw no sign of him. My best friend also ended his own life some years before that, and I felt that if I were ever to experience a spiritual visit, he would have given me some sign. I just want to believe, but I can't. I'm currently 17 and live in Victoria, Australia. I'm a major believer in the paranormal. Let me explain my predicament. My family and I just moved into a rental house about 2 months ago, and have been noticing a shadow out of the corner of our eyes. It started off in only one place where we'd see it pass by one window. This was interesting to me because several of my family members said they'd seen the same thing, and when we decided to finally talk to each other about it, we discovered that we'd seen similar things. At first we shrugged it off. That was until I had my own personal experience. My older brother and I had been sitting at the dinner table. The table is right next to the kitchen bench for reference, when we saw a shadow of a head out of the corner of our eyes poke up, so it was just sticking over the bench. But of course, when we'd look over there, there'd be nothing. Now, we have 2 dogs that are in the house, and at first we thought it was one of them. That was until we realized one was in the room with my sisters, and the other was asleep at our feet. That freaked us out a little, but whatever. It wasn't giving off a bad vibe, so we continued with whatever we were doing. Before we decided to head off to bed, we actually saw it a few more times. My personal experience comes after, when we finally decided to go to bed, probably around midnight. I'd gone to the bathroom after putting the other dog in my room, as one dog is with my sisters and one is with me. Now, where the sink is situated in the bathroom is at the opposite end to the door, so you'd have your back to the door when you wash your hands. I'd finished washing my hands and turned around to locate a towel or something to dry them with, when I saw a shadowy figure walk past the doorframe. Me, being in a kind of curious daze, while keeping my head straight, walked very slowly to the doorframe which leads to a small doorway, and once I'd reached the opening, I could see out of the corner of my eye. It was so close that, if I'd have slightly lifted my hands, I would have touched it. But of course, once I looked directly at it, it's gone. After the encounter, I hadn't seen it in almost 2 weeks. I'm not sure if it's bad or not. But does anyone know what this could be? Because I'm a bit freaked out. About 10 years ago or so, my family and I brought back these small vases, who we were told were 400 years old, from Machu Picchu. The vases were made from mud and had a face carved on them. We were given them by a family friend who said he wanted to give us something special for visiting Peru. He claims he brought them from a local in the Pisco region of Peru where Machu Picchu is. We brought it back home to Canada, and pretty much from week 1, a horrible streak of bad luck and accidents began to happen to our family. My mum came down with cataract at a very young age. My father lost both his jobs. My brother and I were both constantly sick, and my little sister would start screaming randomly. Pretty much on the verge of being homeless, we were looking for things to sell and came across these things. We didn't know if we could even sell them, and for how much. To get an idea of the value, we called one of my dad's friends in Peru who had worked in a museum. After a bit of back and forth, he told my dad that these types of items are not meant to leave its home soil and are not worth more than a few bucks. He said that these items are probably cursed. He said to lift the curse, we prick our fingers and smear a little bit of blood on each one and send them back. Now, of course, we were very skeptical and thought they were probably worth something. We assumed the guy wanted them so that he could sell them. I mean, a blood sacrifice? That's ridiculous. Fast forward 2 days, my mother and father get into a pretty nasty car accident. We were okay, but they both needed to be off work for a few weeks. After that, they both decided that maybe we should send them back and do the blood thing. We sent them back, and the next week after that, things got noticeably better. My father found a very good job, as did my mum. We found a really good place to live with a very low rent and overall better health. What do you guys think? Coincidence or cursed pots? My brother used to live with our aunt for a few years. My youngest cousin, who was a little girl back then, was made to share a room with her older sister, so my brother could use her room. My little cousin's room was filled with dolls of all shapes and sizes, as in the only space in the room without one was the bed and a few steps leading to it. As expected, this creeped out my brother all the time, and he would take his time to reposition them in a way that their backs faced him instead. But without fail, every time he woke up, all the dolls were facing him again. He said there were even 3 or 4 dolls that always ended up sitting beside his head, even if he had put them away in the cabinet or locked them out of the room. At first, we tried brushing it off by saying it couldn't have been our cousins playing a prank on him, until it went on even when he was alone in the house for days. He got so used to it didn't bother him anymore after a few months, as it happened to him until the day he moved out 2 years later. My aunt and cousins said they'd never experienced anything remotely weird in that room, so it was clear they had a preference for my brother. I'm nearly 30 now, and still remember this experience like it were yesterday. I was curious to know if it's happened to anyone else in their lifetime. I was around 7 years old. We had a huge 2-story house where most of the living rooms and such were upstairs. The garage and laundry were downstairs. The stairs themselves were quite tall. 2 flights of stairs went to the top, made some form of wood, and my bedroom was the first room on the right at the top of these stairs. I was sound asleep one night, when all of a sudden I was dreaming of someone being in the laundry. Immediately following that, in my sleep, I heard this extremely loud thumping sound. Someone was running up the stairs, and it was in a hurry. I awoke and I could hear it still. It was running, and then it stopped. A moment later I heard breathing outside my doorway. My door was open, as I usually like sleeping with the door open and hallway light on. I was pretty much frozen and petrified at this point. Usually, in bad dreams as a wee kid, you would call out for your parents. I was too frozen and too scared to do anything, let alone call out. I laid down and faced the wall, not wanting to move, and I could still hear that breathing. I had a gut feeling something was just sitting outside the doorway. I woke up next morning and noticed one of my figurine toys had been moved around. That was the last thing I remembered from that experience. I then started having awful reoccurring dreams in every house we moved to. These dreams lasted probably a good 5 to 7 years, and I would wake up in my dreams with my door open. I would look down the hallway from my bed and see someone sitting at the dining table. In my dream, I would do the same thing, just lay back down and pretend to be asleep. However, in the dream, this figure would always get up, walk into my room, and put its hands over my face. I would always go through a motion where I would try to force myself to wake up, rolling my eyes around and the like, even trying to twitch my body or yell. This strange figure, which I could never see since my eyes were closed in the dream, would try to suffocate me with its hands over my whole face to prevent me from waking up. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? Because of my general interest in horror, and because they were appealing to me for a while, I collected dolls. It didn't matter what type. I had some porcelain ones, some pretty-looking horror movie-level dolls, that sort of stuff. They were generally creepy to the majority of people, and of course, they're haunted, was a joke that I often had. But I never had an issue with any of them. In fact, I thought they were all comforting. They all had names, and I had a history of picking them out, usually from antique shops, but I had 2 or 3 from a house sale after the owner passed away. On October 28, 2017, my parents were out of town, so my brother and I were home alone, and my dad sent me a picture of the coolest doll they found at this church thrift shop. The doll was the epitome of everything I liked. I loved clowns and circuses, and the soft pastel colors were my absolute favorite. So much so that I was writing a story at the time that reflected these interests. The doll was perfect. It felt like it was for me, like in that Coraline sort of way, but instead of looking like me, it was just something no one else could have wanted. In all honesty, I don't think my dad would buy it, but lo and behold, when my parents returned, I had a new doll to add to the collection. This was the first doll that I hadn't bought on my own or personally picked out, but I wouldn't expect it to matter. All of this happened, and I found out more things about the doll. One being that my parents bought it and the cashier avoided touching it completely. On top of that, they said, "Oh, you're buying him." Honestly, that wasn't uncommon. I'd been given a doll for free before because it was in such bad shape. One man's trash is another man's treasure. Having some aversion to a creepy doll was nothing new. Another interesting factoid about this was that my father, who is very strongly a factual person and doesn't believe in ghosts even the slightest, said he felt this doll before he saw it. To say the least, my mum wasn't happy he went through with the purchase when she found that out. I remember vividly how excited I was to hold it for the first time. I got no negative feelings from it. This was just a doll. I do remember that one of the first things I noticed was his lack of eyes. I figured it was an old one, and the eyes had fallen out. If anything, it just made me like him more. The creepy clown doll, who I never named, quickly found his spot on my shelf, and all was well. I don't even remember when I started to get a bad feeling. It started minimally, small things like feeling uncomfortable around them, or that I didn't like them facing me when I was laying down at night. I was never uncomfortable with my dolls, and even when I didn't want to admit it, I wanted to be the weird girl who collected creepy dolls, but all of a sudden being around them made me anxious. I can only explain it as a deep vibrating in my chest that was nothing but discomfort to be in my room. I ignored it for the longest time, but being in that room alone was invoking an anxiety in me that I haven't felt before or since. At some point, I started having progressively worse nightmares, a reoccurring theme that they were never far from real life. In fact, they usually took place exactly where I was at the time, whether it be my bed, the couch. They were where those nightmares would be so convincing, you'd be unsure whether you had woken up or not. I recall 2 nightmares in particular. One where I was laying in bed. The room was dark, but not so dark. I couldn't see anything. I was laying on my side facing away from the dolls and towards my closet. The door slowly opened, and there was a really big doll just standing inside of it, bigger than people-sized. It looked at me, but only its eyes moved, and for a moment, that's all I saw before I awoke. This was my first experience with what I can only identify with sleep paralysis, but I don't know if I was actually unable to move or not, or if I was just too scared of what might happen if I did. Of course, nothing was in my closet. It sounds like a cheesy nightmare for sure, but to me this was terrifying. It made it hard to breathe, and made my stomach ring. The other nightmare was when I was taking a nap on the couch, and in the dream I woke up and went to my room. When I went inside, I looked at the dolls and they were moved. Then I woke up again, and this repeated. Each time the dolls became more and more scattered, laying on the floor or completely broken altogether. Something was moving them. It couldn't have been an accidental nudge before I awoke. It looked like something had angrily shoved them all off the shelf. Eventually I did wake up, and the fear I felt as I slowly went to my room was unlike anything I had felt before. I walked as slowly as I possibly could, as if that was going to help with anything. I was just scared of the possibility that they might have been moved. I knew that if I went in my room and the dolls were out of place, something was really screwed up. I turned on every light I could. I was visibly shaking with fear, but nothing was moved. It almost felt like I was being mocked. The nightmares continued for a while with no attempts to be fixed. If anything, I just made them worse. Staying awake when I definitely shouldn't have been. Avoiding getting my REM cycle because, due to my research, I found that's when you had nightmares, which I didn't want. I can't remember any other specific nightmare, but a lot of it was just the fear and anxiety that accompanied being in my room. Being near the doll and how uncomfortable it made me. My dad even said he went in my room to get a pair of headphones, and his hip which has been broken since I was about 8 or so, was suddenly full of a shooting pain, and when he left the room it stopped. It was those small, strange encounters that made it so out of the ordinary. I would do anything to get away from that room when I could, and I didn't even realize it anymore. It was my subconscious telling me that I needed to fear my own space. It was my own subconscious telling me I wasn't safe there anymore, and I usually tried to listen to it. After New Year's is when I put all the dolls away. The night before I had decided to move all the dolls out of my room. I hadn't focused on the fear of any specific one, so I just moved them all out. That same night, I awoke and moved them back into my room. I don't know why, I just felt like they needed to be back. They couldn't be sitting out there. I just needed to move them back in. Apparently that morning I had been acting strangely, and eventually my mum and I moved the dolls into a box and into the attic, after I broke down explaining to her how scared I had been feeling about those dolls lately. My mum is a very spiritual person, so she was open to helping me put the dolls away. I haven't had an issue since, but I did do some more research on the doll a few months ago. For a while, I didn't like talking about them or even thinking about them, so I hadn't even looked at pictures of them. These were all things I found out quite a while later. A few things. For one, I finally looked back on all of this, and the one doll that did have eyes. In the picture my father sent me, which I needed to scroll through 2 years of messages to find, that doll, he had an eye. Of course, it could have fallen out during the drive. I didn't doubt the possibility, but I didn't push the doll's eye out. They were gone as soon as I had him the first time. Maybe it's a coincidence, or I'm thinking about it too much. On top of that, I couldn't find any other dolls that quite looked like it. My girlfriend and I found a few online that looked similar, but they were never an exact match. The colors were all wrong, the face shape wasn't quite the same, and I still haven't found any that do resemble the doll. I even tried reaching out to the manufacturers that created dolls that I thought looked like it the most, and assumed maybe there just weren't many pictures online, but I never got a way of contact. All I know is that it still deeply disturbs me when I think about that doll. When my sister was quite young, our grandmother bought her a porcelain doll. The doll wasn't anything special. It wasn't an antique or anything like that. It was just one that you would buy at a novelty shop. It was on a stand and couldn't be moved without possibly breaking it. She had this doll for a few years before my parents divorced. After the divorce, we moved in with our mother in a poor neighborhood in Alton, Illinois. The house felt strange. It also had a strange smell. My sister put the doll in one of the built-in cabinets in the wall, and that's where she stayed for the first few days. At first, we started to notice small changes about where she was or how she was positioned differently than she was before. She would be on the shelf facing the living room most of the time, and when you left the room and came back, she would be rotated a different way. Okay, we thought. Mum's probably messing with us. We largely ignored it, but it kept happening. After a few more months, the doll started ending up in different places in the house. She would be on the cabinet, and when you came back from another room, she would be on the dining room table, or she would be on one side of the table in the living room by the couch, or on the floor facing the television. We had made a lot of new friends in the neighborhood, and when they came over, I would show them what the doll would do, and without a hitch, I would put her somewhere, and we would leave the room for a few minutes and return, and she would now be in a different spot. Now, I'll go back to saying that we thought my mum was messing with us at first, but mum was at work a lot of those days, and we skipped school plenty of times to stay home, so it wasn't mum doing this. One day, we decided to mess with the Ouija board I had in my closet. I don't remember if we bought it or it was just there. The messages coming back from the questions we asked identified a spirit called Candy Zimmerman. She didn't say much, but I also being able to connect with her myself by the board. She said she had a crush on me. One day I skipped school again, but my sister went, and I always walked with my buddy down to the bus stop and hung out with him before heading back home, and I watched my sister get on the bus. My mum worked early, so she wasn't there that day. Then I went back to the house and locked up, and since I was still tired, I opted to go back to bed. The next thing that happened, I will never forget. I heard a knock at my bedroom door. It startled me awake, but I ignored it and laid my head back down. After a few minutes, there was another knock, this one much louder and in a rhythm. I still also remember to this day. Think shave and haircut rhythm, but different. This time I was freaked out and laid there with my eyes open for I don't know how long. The door to my bedroom was heavy, and it always stuck in warmer weather, which it was. The next thing that happened was the door popped open just enough for me to see out into the hallway, but not enough for me to see over the edge of my bed. I sat up in bed and looked down on the floor, and there standing at the entrance to my room was that doll on its stand, looking at me. Before the fear set in, I was actually pissed off. Did my sister come back? Was she messing with me? I got up, took the doll by the hair, and carried her out into the living room. No one was there. I checked the front door and it was locked. I barged to my sister's room and no one was there. I barged into my mum's room. No one was home. At this point I was freaking out. I took the doll to my sister's room and threw her in the closet. I buried her in a stack of bags full of old clothes and boxes of junk and shut the door. I spent the rest of the day sitting on the front porch, waiting for Mum to come home. It never happened again, and I made sure to have a friend or local Wiccan bind the Ouija board which she kept. We moved out of the house a year later, and after a few more paranormal incidences. As for the doll, after we moved back in with my father, she was in my bedroom closet for about 5 years. One day we cleaned it out and threw her away. Was the doll haunted? I don't know. It could have just been that house, and whatever it was, moving things around. Out of high school, I worked at a cute little shop that sold gift baskets, goodies, and all sorts of home decor. This was before Big Box Hobby Lobby, and at the time, the store was one of the most popular places to go in town to get cute things for your house, or great gifts for people. The store was actually located in one of the oldest houses in the area. All the stores around there were actually houses at one time, and it became this cute, quaint shopping area. For a long time after I started, none of the other workers discussed that the house/shop was haunted. I don't think they were purposefully keeping it from me, it just didn't come up. The shop/house was a 2-story, with a basement and attic as well. We always stayed open until 7:30 p.m. during the week, and there were always 2 closers for safety. When closing up, the front doors were locked to prevent any customers from coming in, and you can believe we locked that up on the dot so that we could clean up, balance the register, and get the heck out of there. There was a back door, but we kept that locked too. Those are the only 2 ways in and out of the house/store. On the night something happened to my friend Amanda and I, we were closing and the front door was locked up. We're cleaning, doing our thing as normal, and we're about to go, and had walked through the shop top to bottom, turning off all the lights, and we're standing at the back door, when out of nowhere, we heard the most evil laugh I've ever heard in my entire life. We both freak out, grab each other, and did the thing that you shouldn't do in every horror movie, which is run to the basement. In my defense, that's where the phone was. We ran back upstairs, busted out the back door, and called the cops. We called the owners too. They showed up and cleared the place, and were more than understanding, and indicated they got calls to old houses all the time. The owner's husband shows up, and he was clearly perturbed at us for having called the cops, and said that we should have called him first, and that we're just a bunch of silly girls. However, he then begins to proceed to tell us a story about how when he was doing bookwork one evening in the basement, he heard voices upstairs. So he went up to investigate, thinking his wife and daughter had stopped by. He got up, and the voices stopped. So he went back downstairs and got back to work. He said he then heard them again, and returned to the upstairs part. And this time the conversation continued while he was standing there, and he himself skedaddled out of there. He never did tell us what he overheard specifically. Obviously, the story got out amongst the staff about our experience, and people started talking about theirs. Someone told us they saw jelly jars flying right off the shelf. Another co-worker told us she would be balancing the register and she could hear furniture upstairs being dragged back and forth, when the shop was totally devoid of customers, and her closing partner was in the back cleaning up. One of the managers told us that frequently when opening in the morning, she would go upstairs to turn on all the lights and would hear sounds of little girls playing in what would have been one of the house's bedrooms. The husband and wife would get very upset if you referred to what was going on in the house/shop as a haunting or a ghost. She was a woman of great faith, and she would always say that they were her angels. I can honestly say nothing further ever happened to me when I was working there, but it was totally creepy afterwards, especially to turn the lights off upstairs or having to go to the attic and/or basement. Follow up to this story, here I am almost 20 years later, and I live across the street from someone who now owns the building and has a different shop in it. The next time I catch her, I'm going to try and not look crazy and just ask her if she's experienced anything there. When I was 14, my family and some of our friends went to the myrtle plantation in St. Francisville. That was a terrifying experience. When we got there, I felt like this shroud engulfed me. Before our tour, we were walking around, and I heard, "Where's Cornelia?" and just thought it was my mum's friend asking about her kid. And maybe I heard her wrong. Her kid's name was Cameron, but when I asked her husband where she was, he said she went to the bathroom inside. When the tour began, I kept feeling distracted like I was dreaming. I was barely listening until our tour guide told us about the owners and the slaves that killed her master's family by accident. Chloe wanted to give her mistress and her children food poisoning and accidentally killed them. One of their children's names was Cornelia, and they were buried where I had heard the voice. I had to ask the tour guide twice before I could believe it. Then towards the end of the tour, we were taken to the trees in front of the house, where they hung slaves. I remember walking to the tree line and suddenly feeling as if no one was with me, and I saw flashes of people hanging there, and I heard weeping. I almost passed out and told my mum I needed to sit down, so she walked with me to a bench near the house. When she asked me what was wrong, I told her and began to cry. That evening we all went to this Mexican restaurant. I couldn't eat because the food was making my mouth hurt, like I had an ulcer, and I went to the restroom to find 2 sores in my mouth. Then that night at the hotel room, I woke up to the feeling of someone watching me, and I see this black shadow figure near the foot of the bed. I had to turn on the bathroom light just to go back to sleep. After the tour, they allow you to go around and take pictures of the outside of the house. The only photos they allow of the inside are of this mirror that supposedly the souls of the mistress and her children are stuck in. My mum took a ton of pictures on the outside, and we didn't look through them until we got home. We actually captured something in the photo. My mum didn't notice it, but when I looked I found her, Chloe, the slave that accidentally killed her mistress and the children. She was standing behind my mum in the picture. My mum had taken a close photo of the window trying to get a photo of the inside of the house, and you can clearly see my mum's reflection. And then standing behind her, a figure wearing a turban on her head and period clothing. She had no face. My mum had taken 4 photos of the window. In the first, you can see my brother standing behind my mum and the chairs on the porch. The second is the same. The third is the one with her standing behind my mum. And the fourth is the same as the first 2. It freaked me the hell out. My mum also took a few of the mirror as well. In the reflection you can see all of us, my sister and her friends up front, both with white shirts. But in the reflection there are also 3 black orbs. You can see them clearly because of my sister and her friend's shirts. A large orb and 2 smaller ones. For weeks, I felt like I've been watched by something. Even when I talk about it now, I'm feeling like I'm reliving it. That strange, dreamlike feeling, and my throat is closing up. The myrtle plantation is one of the most haunted in Louisiana. I visited a number of them, but have never felt as scared as I have there. So, I'm pretty sure I accidentally invited something into my house. I named it The Aula, after the short story by Guy de Maupassant, where a guy does the same. It started when I lost my keys. A bunch of us were at a friend's house in a small village outside of town. They were in a band together, and I was their default roadie / tag-along, and we performed at the local venue that evening. Since his house was closest to the place, we stayed over there. We were probably about 18 to 19 years old at the time, and we were a rowdy bunch. So when our friend's mum, whose house it was, asked us to steal a roll-up carpet that she liked the look of from a garage down the street, we were up for it. The great carpet robbery went off without a hitch, right up until we were jogging back up the hill to the house with this thing on our shoulders. That was when the button on my trousers broke and my trousers fell. I tripped over them and the contents of my pockets went flying into the night. I found my wallet and phone, but my keys were nowhere to be seen, and I was fearful that an extended search might lead to us getting caught. So I had to give them up as lost forever on some country road in the middle of nowhere. 2 weeks later, I was reading in bed when I heard them fall. I had a half-attic conversion, which was a pretty big space. The rest of the floor was taken up by a spare room with a little storage space left over in the ceiling above it. There was no furniture in the middle of my room for the keys to have fallen from, let alone a way for them to have been there, since I lost them about 12 miles away in the aforementioned middle of nowhere. Yet there they were, right in the middle of my carpet, and I heard them land there. After this, strange things started to happen around the house. I'd hear things in the spare room next to me, like someone moving around, but there'd be no one there when I'd check. I'd wake up to find my empty glasses beside the bed, despite being certain I hadn't drunk any of it, and my computer would randomly turn itself on in the night, waking me up with a sudden whir of its fan. One morning I was awoken by some baby birds tweeting loudly somewhere in my ceiling. I had noticed a bird coming and going outside my window, and it had obviously found a way into the space between my ceiling and the outside tiles of the roof. Just as I was contemplating how the hell I was going to deal with this, there was a loud, honest-to-God snarl and an equally loud bang on the roof. The tweeting stopped instantly, and I never heard it again. The snarl was like a dog or something, full-throated and furious. The bang was like someone slamming a fist onto a table. Another instance happened while I was at work on a Saturday morning. There was no one in the house save my girlfriend, who was having a lie-in. She was on her side facing away from the bedroom door when something sat on the other side of the bed. She felt the mattress go down with the weight of whatever it was, and she froze. She didn't dare move or open her eyes. After a minute or two, the weight lifted and she was gone. When she eventually got the courage to look around, there was no one there. She was so freaked out she rang me at work to tell me about it, and then left the house to spend the day in town until I got home. So yeah, I accidentally gave some entity keys to my place, and it took that as an invitation, and moved into my spare room. It hasn't done anything hostile so far. In fact, an argument could be made that it's trying to be helpful, but nonetheless, still freaky as hell. Last year, I was cycling in Tuscany on holiday. I knew the guy who ran it, as it was my coach who also runs a national race team. We're a close-knit bunch on the holiday, as most people know each other from riding together back home. Later in our trip, the coach is talking about something strange that happened to him the night before. I didn't hear him at the time, as I was using the climbs as training and pushing on. We stop for lunch and he starts talking about his experience, and I ask him what he's talking about. He goes on to explain that he was asleep, and then all of a sudden he starts hearing talking, but just a little bit, as he thinks that it's very weird, as he's alone in that part of the villa, as it's a massive place that's been split into apartments. And he sits up and then gets pushed back down. In the morning he calls his wife back home, and she said she'd felt something when she was out there with him earlier that week, like she was being watched. Now on hearing this I started mocking him, and back at the villa I carry it on. So 2 nights later it's still a topic for jokes. We go to bed and I crash. Then at 2 a.m. I wake up and can't sleep, so I just lay there. Then I hear talking and think that it's my mate in the room next door, who I'm sharing the apartment with, just talking to his wife back home in England. So I think nothing of it. About 30 minutes later, I'm tossing and turning, when out of nowhere I feel like my head is being pushed into the pillow, and someone is holding my shoulder down as well. I was freaking out. It stops seconds later, but feels longer, and as it stops I hear a laugh, and I didn't sleep again that night. I told him in the morning what happened, and he thought I was winding him up. We've since found out that the villa has a history of things happening. Also, his apartment and mine are joined by a door. The rest are completely separate. We're back there again next month. I won't be mocking anyone though, as I don't want karma to take effect. I moved to Prague in the Czech Republic to work as a private teacher after I figured that the labour situation was far from good in my home country of Belgium for recent graduates. My girlfriend and I are renting an apartment in Hradčanska. That area is fairly close from Prague Castle. It is a duplex located on the last floor of the building, which must be around 80 to 100 years old. However, the apartment where we live has only been inhabited for 20 years, since it used to be the attic of the building. We'd lived there for 5 months. It's quite modern and bright, nothing to be scared of. However, last month, I offered to keep the dog of one of my students, a lovely young fox terrier, only for 3 weeks while she was out of the country. I love dogs, but living on the 6th floor without elevators is a deal breaker for owning one permanently. The first night was terrible. The dog couldn't stop whining because it was so used to sleeping in the same bed as its owner, but that isn't too much of a thing, mostly my girlfriend in all honesty. To be able to get some sleep and reassure the dog, I went down and slept on the couch. The dog was silent for the rest of the night, and I woke up in the early hours at around 6 or 7. That's when I heard what I thought to be my girlfriend walking down the wooden stairs. I heard the cracking of wood and light steps going towards the couch. I was half awoken, but frankly felt that it was too early to show it and start conversation. That's when I felt her sitting on the couch and leaning on me, and when I decided it would be time to turn around and kiss her hello. It's an L-shaped sofa, and I was lying on the smaller part, but when I turned around, there was nothing. I listened intently and could hear her upstairs gently snoring. Obviously, I freaked because I have a history of sleep paralysis, and I hate it when it happens. And so I thought for the next day that was it. Sleep paralysis. I hate it, but at least I know it's nothing hostile. A few days later, my mum and my cousin came to visit us in Prague and spend Christmas holiday together. They slept on the same sofa, and I was really happy because the dog wouldn't whine anymore, as it was not alone downstairs during the night. After their first night, we woke up, and my mum asked who went to the toilet in the early morning. I didn't, neither did my girlfriend, as far as she said. My mum then told me that in the early morning at around 6 or 7, she heard one of us go to the stairs, walk towards the bathroom, which is after the corridor between the couch and the entrance, and stop for a few seconds before the couch. She said she felt like she was being watched, just like I had before, but that it was a bit early to wake up and chat. It's only after we told her about my first experience that she became pale and asked if we were pulling her leg. We weren't. A few days passed, and my mum and cousin returned to Belgium. My girlfriend goes to France to celebrate her mother's 50th birthday, and I decided, because I did not feel too courageous about being home alone after these experiences, to let the dog come up with me. 2 nights ago, I was sleeping on my stomach. The dog was by my side, and I again, in the early morning, heard someone either sighing or laughing lightly. I thought it might have been a sleep hallucination, but the dog got up, with its ears all pointy, as if they were trying to hear where the noise was coming from. The dog kept looking in the void towards the direction where I thought the noise had come from a few seconds prior. Now, the dog has returned to its family, and I'm home alone until Saturday. I have never wanted my girlfriend to be back more than now.